Delphi. Um, what it sounds like to me, considering the trappings of the god, um, it sounds like a cult of Dionysus.
It may have been related to that, but this was a specific temple somewhere that that had it seemed to have like its entire purpose was this rite of passage ritual.
Hmm.
Let me I'm trying to find it.
Yeah. Were you able to find
I
it,
could
Doug?
have swore it started with an A,
An A.
like Abyssinia or Abyss. I don't remember. It may have been Roman temple. I just don't remember.
Well,
Temple.
Eleusinian, because there was the Eleusinian mysteries, which was sacred to Demeter and Persephone.
Was there a specific temple? Or how do you spell that?
Eleusinian, Eleusinian. So Eleusinia would be without an N.
Yeah, I think this is it. Where initiation ceremonies held every year for the cult of Demeter and Persephone.
Yeah. There's the greater and lesser uh, mysteries. One in the spring and the other in the autumn.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure this is it.
Yeah.
Anyway, I read a little bit about it, but I forgot the name, and then I heard it again on a podcast, and I guess that there was some speculation as to what the purpose of the specific temple was, but then some stuff came to light, and they were thinking it was mainly used for this initiation ceremony.
Um,
Like people from all over the place, especially like higher, I guess, higher class people would even come and do this ceremony.
well, actually, with the Eleusinian, it was usually higher class or people who were considerably older because
Hmm.
the induction to the mysteries usually took a considerable amount of income. Usually had to save up for it.
Hmm.
Um, there was psychoactive use in the Eleusinian. It was attached to the grain. You know what ergot is?
Yeah, yeah, that was what I was thinking of.
It's a fungal parasite. It's a precursor to LSD, LSA.
Right. And didn't they like make some kind of drink with it with wheat that had like or some kind of grain that had a ergot infection?
A lot of times, yes.
Yeah.
It has it's analogous to soma from Hinduism, from especially particularly Vedic religion that predates Hinduism.
Hmm.
There are other theories though with regards to what was used. in the sort of hallucinogenic sacrament. Some have said that the Kikaon was DMT, like from the
Now,
acacia,
where would they? How would they have gotten that? Because then you have to combine a bunch of stuff.
from the acacia.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but they would have had to combine it
Yeah.
from with some kind of MAOI.
Yeah, because your body can't quite process it correctly, right? Or it doesn't become psychoactive until you combine it with an MAOI, right?
Yes, it has because it's taken orally. There's different
Mhm.
ways of taking DMT, but to take it orally, you need an MAOI.
Anyway, hearing about that just made me think, like, I don't know how much knowledge we have, but made me wonder about just how extensive the use of hallucinogens were in the ancient period, and especially in regards to like religious tradition.
There's a lot of theories about it, but our best knowledge is that it would have been localized to specific aspects of the cult, and
Uh,
it wouldn't always have been used, and not even within the same cult. Um, I mean, think about any gathering with people. Not every single person at a gathering is going to partake of a particular
mhm.
substance. So there's a lot of things to consider with regards to that.
Now I wonder what it was like in the Americas. I mean, I wonder if it was more commonly used there.
Perhaps.
Yeah.
I think there's an unfortunate tendency among some members of academia to relegate certain rituals to psychoactive substances. That they make substantive claims about the core elements of mysticism to the uh, entheogens. That's the only reason why that those beliefs existed in those cults was because they were using those substances. I think it's a little fallacious.
Yeah, I think there's probably some kind of interplay between them. I mean, you can obviously have religious experience without chemicals, obviously.
Yes.
But I think it would have served to enhance and probably, and for certain groups that used it, probably just enhance that or complement that already existing like religious experience that people have.
Yes. And a lot of why we have the sorts of perspectives that we do is because of, especially with mysteries and things of that nature, is from outside. How other people viewed people who partaked in that.
Hmm.
And one of the most ubiquitous elements of something like that, that largely falls outside of the social order, is those people who were clearly using those sorts of substances.
Yeah.
Uh, for instance, the Berserkers, which were warriors that were sacred to Odin in Norse society, have become associated with the use of the fly agaric mushroom, Amanita muscaria. Um, though it's you know not all that logical to suggest that not every single berserker would have used that substance. There were other substances that were also being used at the time. Uh, Cannabis, for instance, was used among several different uh, older European groups that had access to the substance.
Um, I heard an interesting thing recently too. I think it may have been on the same podcast, but about the berserkers that they the Nordic peoples would like have them, I guess, in a position of authority while they were, I guess you could say, on the offensive or warring or raiding. But then when
Yes.
they would settle down, they would kind of give him a house somewhere and like basically kick him out of command because they didn't want those kind of people ruling over a settled, a now settled population.
Well, we have a lot of kind of terms that we have in our own language in modern day. You ever heard when somebody's called a loose cannon?
Hmm.
Yeah. I mean, those are the kinds of people that, serve a function in certain instances, but not all the time. They're not necessarily the people that you would want to lead. Um,
Yeah.
and society has different views with regards to aggression, particularly, especially now, whereas it wouldn't have been the case even fairly recently in our history. Uh, this sort of dissociation we have with people in authority who have military prowess or tactical understandings. We're less inclined to value that in our leaders than we were in even decades past.
Yeah.
When you say we, do you refer to just Americans? Because I know that in as other countries that still is a really big thing.
That's
Even
true.
some Eastern European countries.
Sure. I was speaking more particularly to America, but
Okay.
also more the sort of Western world. Not necessarily all Europeans, for sure. But yeah, it definitely is more valued in other non-American countries than it is in America, for sure.
Were other cultures known to have that kind of a policy where they would put the aggressive, quote unquote, loose cannons in charge during like a warring period and then basically kick them out afterward?
The
Some did
rel-
it multiple times.
yeah, the relationship that the ancient Greeks had in their city-states, particularly with Athens and Sparta, very much embodied that kind of concept. There was a lot of sort of distrust of Spartans, particularly among the Athenians, but they were valued in times of conflict quite often, and then dismissed after the fact.
Because they knew them to be dangerous leaders, I guess.
That, and also a lot of the aspects of their culture, conflicted the social norms that were uh, indicative of Athenian society. Uh,
Hmm.
for instance, one of the things that you commonly see among Spartans that you didn't see in Athens, women had more say in society. There were prominent female members of Spartan society that not only owned land, they led. They actually had power that was considerably more equivalent than would be present in Athenian culture. There's a there's a saying that is sort of almost like a proverb that was preserved from ancient Greece, and it usually goes something to the effect of an Athenian woman spoke to a leader in Sparta who was female, and the Athenian woman asked the Spartan woman, "So why is it exactly that Spartan women lead?" And the Spartan woman says, "Because we are the only ones that make real men."
Pretty good.
Yeah, and there's little nuances that you see in just like the way they treated rites of passage. For instance, in Athens, it was common for young boys to grow their hair out, for it to not be cut, and there was often a ritual of the cutting um, of the hair when they reached puberty, and it was kind of a sign of of entrance into the social structure, entrance into the public square. And in Athens, the kind of ancient equivalent of a barber shop was a common area of public discourse where many things would have been discussed, including public policy. So there was very much that kind of extension. Whereas in Sparta, it was the exact opposite. In Sparta, when you were a young boy, your hair was constantly cut. It was kept short. And then when you entered into puberty, you were allowed to grow your hair and your beard.
Ah.
It was encouraged for you to express that level of raw virility.
Hmm.
And past that point, you would be challenged. There were many things that were common, particularly among their soldiers. There was a blood pudding that Spartan soldiers would eat. It was horrible tasting, and you were often challenged to be able to finish a bowl of the blood pudding. It was a sort of sign of your wherewithal.
Reminds me of a scene in Game of Thrones where this woman has to eat a horse's heart to kind of prove her.
That's very much in line with that sort of thinking.
Yeah.
Obviously, the dialectic you see between the Athenians and Spartans is the most ubiquitous, but there's a great deal of variety that existed in the various city-states. For instance, if you compare Athenian roles of sexuality to those in Crete, there was considerable difference. In Crete, they were far more relaxed about sexuality. They didn't really care all that much about what we would consider sexual orientation, whereas Athens was considerably more Victorian by comparison.
That is interesting.
And the Romans took upon their sort of ideas of sexuality largely from the Athenian Greeks and developed a lot of very kind of draconic sorts of social structures that reflected that. Hence why there was a whole caste of prostitutes in Roman society, and they had all sorts of different terms for specifics with regards to that. So there's a lot of nuance in history that is missing, and as Jonathan was kind of talking about earlier, a lot of history is sort of contextualized with very particular ideals instead of having all of the particulars laid out for people to see and then allowing them to critically think as a student, as an individual, and then coming to conclusions of one's own based on that information.
Now, do we know like what the root causes were of the variety of outlooks on sexuality in the different city states? Like, was it mainly based off of which particular cults were predominating in those cities and what their attitudes were, or I mean, do we even have any knowledge about?
Philosophical and socioeconomic were largely the where the areas of variance came from, and that does obviously tie in or dovetail with the sorts of cults that were most common, largely because cults of specific deities would have been more common in societies that valued certain things over another. Port cities obviously would have valued Poseidon quite a bit more than, say, Zeus.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And of course, there are different segments of society within all provinces or city-states, to use a term. So,
well, it's interesting that Athens, you're saying, was more Victorian compared to Crete, yet it was probably a much more cosmopolitan city. Probably
yes.
had a more variety of opinions, yet it was ended up having a more Victorian type of approach, I guess.
Well, there was a more prominent aristocracy in Athens. So social control was of a much higher concern. So even if the general populace would have been far less concerned with the sort of eccentricities of lifestyle, what was laid down and what we have preserved in law reflected more of the aristocratic view.
That makes sense.
Hold on a second. My brother was asking if I was hungry.
Hmm.
Yeah. Um, that area in and of itself, just that one subject, has been an area of contention for centuries. I mean, it's been interpreted and reinterpreted. Even within the last century, it's been reinterpreted. Um, I find that when this subject comes up, the best way to explain it is any and all views that you could pretty much have were present in ancient Greece on this subject.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, just like today.
Though the general view of the upper class reflected a more patriarchal perspective, that power and authority came from free men with money.
Well, that makes sense too, because I mean, obviously they had an interest, even if it was subconscious, in maintaining their position in society, and a good way to do that, I guess, would just be to kind of further that patriarchal type of attitude.
Patriarchal, heteronormative. I mean, that's what it comes down to. Is they're trying to preserve the bloodline.
Hmm.
So even when exceptions were made for variant lifestyle, it was generally only accepted within the context of youth. When you were, the sort of term would be like a stripling, somebody who was 18, 19, 20 years old. You know, if you were in that sort of age group, yeah, you could go around and experiment, do whatever you want. It's fine, but you would be expected once you got into your mid to late 20s, okay, you got to have kids and, kind of raise a family and the whole thing, particularly if you were of upper class. They wanted to continue the line and keep power within those individuals and within those families. But there's evidence to suggest that they would have turned the other cheek and they would have sort of turned a blind eye and not really cared quite as much if you were effectively middle class or particularly lower class, unless you were causing some kind of a public nuisance.
Hmm.
But obviously, in other provinces, other city states, um, that was not the case, because completely different focuses, um, completely different economic backgrounds, uh, all sorts of different things, and obviously different cults. Uh, Perfect example of this would be pretty much anywhere where Dionysus was worshipped. There was much more of a lax opinion about lifestyle.
Was that just because of the like social um, levels of most of I mean the social positions of most of the people that were worshippers in that cult?
To an extent, though, there are certain philosophical antecedents that were reflected in
Mm.
Dionysian, hedonistic and eventually more Epicurean. Hedonistic in the classical sense, which means that cultivating positive pleasure, which does include both self-love and love of others and doing good works, whereas Epicurean is the avoidance of pain. It's basically a sort of extension of Hinone. But yes, it very much had to do with social position. In the Dionysian cults, and particularly in the mysteries, social status was fairly irrelevant. You could be a slave, you could be a woman, though there's nothing really written about variant sexual lifestyle. There was definitely stuff written about being a foreigner, that if you were a foreigner, you were allowed to worship. And largely the reason for that is that Dionysus represents the foreign cult. He is a sort of penultimate foreign deity. Sabazios, Osiris, a lot of these sorts of deities from other pantheons were reflected in the mythology that surrounds Dionysus. Uh,
One thing I would add about Epicureanism is, I mean, it isn't so much the avoidance of pain as it is prudent enjoyment of pleasure.
sure.
So, you know, we don't want to reify when Epicurus talks about prudence and temperance, but at the same time, I think it's important to recognize that it wasn't a sort of pure hedonism that went to a point of negligence. I mean, it was almost Aristotelian in its sort of balance of pleasure versus learning the right time to indulge in pleasures, if you will.
Yeah.
Well, what's interesting about that is, I mean, that, the stuff that you just clarified there, it would still seem to make sense in the maximal pleasure kind of goal, because obviously if you just overindulge, you're going to probably in a lot of cases end up in pain eventually, some kind of pain or mishap or unhealthiness. So by taking it a little more slowly, or being a little more prudent about it, as you said, you could probably even maximize your ability to partake in hedonistic pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what I just mentioned is a very common misconception of Epicurus. That really stems back from his own day. I mean, they were all in the garden, and that was, sort of hidden from view. So everybody was sort of wondering, what are they doing back there? And so all these,
Hmm.
well, they're having massive orgies, and orgies were a part of it, but it wasn't like what they made it out to be.
Yeah.
An orgy isn't just sex in the way that a tragedy is not just pain and sorrow.
Exactly.
It's all language, my friends. All
Yes.
language.
And it's, what's interesting to me is the people that nobody speaks into a vacuum.
Exactly.
Very interesting stuff. Wish I
Mhm.
knew more about it.
Yeah, have you ever read? I think I mentioned it before, The Golden Ass by what is his name? Look it up.
You did mention it, but no, I have not read it yet.
Yeah. I mean, if you're in temple ritual, I mean that's basically what our professor used to sort of because it is the number one work that's used in scholars because it's the most comprehensive look at uh, a primary source looking at a mystery cult. Apuleius. Apuleius.
That's the author or the
Yes,
main character?
that's the author.
Okay.
Yep. The Golden Ass.
What's the dating of this writing?
Oh,
Like,
is the only ancient Roman novel in Latin to survive in its entirety. It is sometimes called one of the oldest novels or the first novel, along with Chariton's Chalreus and Clero. In terms of your origin, the date of composition is uncertain. Um, Somewhere in the 150s to 170s, it looks like.
hmm. Okay, so pretty old.
Yeah.
Though the age can be sort of misleading and it isn't necessarily clearly classical, it is important to understand that the Romans did a fairly good job in preserving a lot of the Greek kind of concepts, if for nothing else, in through their own personal context. So it is a valuable resource.
Yeah, I don't put I mean, I don't ever take the dating of specific things like from that far back as, for sure. I mean, I just automatically assume there's a huge margin of error on those, especially when you're dealing with concepts.
Yeah.
It seems very difficult to really nail down precisely a specific date. I mean, obviously, unless you have like some independent mention of its, of when it was created by someone else or something like that. That would be helpful, but we usually don't have anything like that.
Yeah, and I'm not an ancient history scholar. I sort of work on the work of others who I trust have, put the diligence and effort into accurately identifying the subject matter that they profess to teach,
hmm
um, which is limiting, but at the same time, it is unrealistic to be an expert in everything. So,
Oh, definitely.
as much as I try to be, much to the chagrin of my uh, people who socialize with me, people that I socialize with, just get used to being called arrogant. It just happens.
Well,
Just,
things have gotten so specialized in a
that's
lot of
true.
fields that it's just, I'd say, almost impossible to really truly be an expert, being up to speed with the current, with the status of whatever discipline you're an expert within, and then having four or five or six of those, being able to say that about four or five or six independent disciplines,
Yeah.
that's getting more and more hard, because more and more difficult, because we everything's just so getting so specialized.
Yeah.
And one of the limitations of that is it further limits, or at least makes more difficult, cross, um, like interdisciplinary cooperation when it comes to theorizing and research and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, just look at the social sciences as we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, yeah.
It was so funny when I was, going to the sociology class at my university. The departments would literally like duke it out with each other. The science
hmm
department, would just be at arms with the psychologists, and it was hilarious. I couldn't even handle it. But I mean, it's true. I mean, everybody thinks that they've got I've learned something special because I studied this obscure subject, and I mean, yeah, you might have found something special, but my gosh, at least come to a consensus, please.
Yeah, yeah, it's hard. I mean, there's tons of clashes, even in ancient history, study of ancient history going on. People that specialize, say, in, well, I can't really think of any specific examples, but I'm sure that, there's the same sort of thing that's going on in the sciences is
hmm
probably happening in history too.
Well, yeah, I mean, the big problem in history right now is, and it's been going on really since the 70s and 80s, is historical nihilism, which basically states that because you cannot know I mean, it's an embracing of postmodern culture. Because you cannot know something to be objectively true philosophically, how the heck can you know anything to be true historically, which is even removed from yourself?
Yeah, yeah.
And so basically, they say things like, yeah, and really, I mean, it gives people like the Holocaust deniers credence. You're like, well, how do you know? And it gives them a basis for arguing. And the problem is that the same problem with all postmodernism. It's inconsistent of itself. It claims to be an authority when it claims there is no authority. Those sorts of things. And in addition to that, they still use footnotes in their historical nihilist articles. Uh, they're still, you know, and let me put it this way: there are definitely methods within the historic discipline of history for verification. So, every historian agrees that the Battle of Waterloo took place. They may disagree on what color uniform Napoleon wore. They might disagree on these troop movements that happened, but nobody disagrees about the Battle of Waterloo. And I mean, there are certain history has a way of establishing historic fact. And just because, yeah, you can't, it doesn't really matter. I mean, just because there is sort of a periphery of skepticism, to be completely and totally skeptical is not realistic.
Yeah, I think it can definitely go too far. Um, but I do think that there is something to be said when we really go way back and say we're relying on like one source for something. It really gets difficult to have a lot of confidence in, or at least have certainty. Look at the Peloponnesian Wars, something like that, where we're relying on not much, as far as
Yeah, I
the
mean, we've got
details of what
not
happened.
comprehensive work, really.
Yeah. And
Um,
then when but there's tons of examples where we're just relying on like say one ancient author is telling us something and then well, how reliable is that author? Did he have bias? Did he have some kind of political interests? And all those are important, but it's hard too because I mean, if that person's the only person you have, then without them, you basically have nothing. So you can't say anything about history from that point, or from that period, or in that event, or whatever it may be. But I think, it's important to just realize, or say, build into our what we consider to be history, known history. We have to kind of make room for the reliability of our sources and how many of them we have, and stuff like that.
yeah. I mean, I think it's important again just to recognize that there are, yeah, sources of verifying. Yeah. And we may not have an accurate picture right now, but it doesn't mean that we won't in the future.
True.
And I mean, always what the historian has to do is, with honesty, try and historic acumen to try and piece together the events as he sees them in that world.
Hmm.
And that's really the key. I mean, and you can see this with later historians of the Peloponnesian War and how they used a history of something for political or social gain.
Yeah.
And you see that a lot with in the Reformation. I think it was Zwingli's or one of the reformers, I forget who it was, did a history of the life of Saint Anthony, and it wasn't about actually, I mean, it was a biography, but it was being used for political ends. I'd say you'd see the same thing today with someone like Bill O'Reilly and his Killing Lincoln book and his Killing Kennedy book. These are biographies of historic people trying to pass as historic works, but they're highly politicized as well, and they portray a genre of history that is fine-tuned, if you will. um,
Right.
and this happens all the time in history. And being a good historian is being able to recognize when that's going on. No historic work is made in a vacuum. When someone takes the pen to the paper, there's a reason for it, and they're responding to someone else, or they're trying to put their ideas out there. There's always a reason why a historian puts the pen to the page, and that's part of being a good archival historian is to understand why did this person at this point in history write these words. Like you see that with like Martin Luther and the bondage of the will is a response to Desiderius Erasmus and what he had wrote originally. And it becomes Luther's greatest work, the work that he's most known for.
Hmm. But you're saying it's obvious from the content of that work that it's a response to Erasmus.
Yeah, but he's also talking about it directly.
Oh,
um
okay. So he actually.
Yeah,
mentions.
there's engagement there. I mean,
Okay.
you look at what's his Thomas Aquinas and his systematic theology, his
Yeah.
that or his Summa Theologica is actually a handbook for African missionaries who are going and interacting with the ideas of the Islamic clerics and scholars. That's why Thomas Aquinas is so Aristotelian, is because he's fighting against what the Islamic scholars had come up with, which was called integrated Aristotelianism, which is this idea that something can be true in Islam and false in the sciences, and something can be true in the sciences and false in Islam, and there's no um, inconvenience between the two. And it really set up a very dualistic view where people either took two sides. They either became intensely secular and gobbled up the faith, or they became extremely destructive towards any scientific learning whatsoever and destroyed the sciences. They went on two ends of the spectrum. I mean, so and Aquinas was like, no, there's a unity between the sciences and faith, and that's always been the. I shouldn't say that always been the view. There's always, the 1950s is a good example of against that, but historically, there was a view that science and religion go hand in hand. Only there were flashpoints where papal authority was threatened by certain
Right.
scientific ideas, and those were the ones that were crushed. However, not every scientific idea was, unlike what Neil deGrasse Tyson would have you believe.
Hmm.
He's another guy. He does a history of science where he is very clear on what his goals are in demonstrating the history, to basically say where we are right now is the best damn place ever, and he reads that into the history. So instead of looking at the history constructively and looking at European motivations for the Enlightenment, or looking at secular scholars of that period who would say that, apart from this Christian idea of a rational universe with a reasonable God, that scientific laws can be understood from that. I mean, you see Newton writing just as much theology as he is science. Um, Neil deGrasse Tyson looks at that and he says, "Well, God filled in the gaps, and so the role of science is to get rid of all those gaps that God fills." And that is a reified narrative, an anachronistic narrative that goes back into the past and tries to put something there that isn't there. This sort of motivation to that progress comes from rejecting theological ideas. Basically, that's his premise, and that is it's almost conspiracy theory esque, to sort of take a modern idea and throw it in the past and say this is where it is every single time. Hammer it home.
Yeah, I don't think it is quite so cut and dried as sometimes presented, like you say.
Is that a history major or has been a history major?
Anyone here right now?
Yeah.
Nope, not me.
No. Guess I'm the
I'm
only one.
I'm present and accounted for.
Oh, there we go.
Just listening.
What was your what's your main period of study if you have one, or what was the one on your major projects on? If you don't mind me asking.
Not quite sure, because I'm not a history major.
Oh, okay.
I'm a history enthusiast, I guess.
There you go. Most people are history enthusiasts because they know the value of history, and they know also the value of getting a good job, and so they choose to get a good job.
The middle path.
Yeah, exactly. I really want to become a scholar of history, of church history and everything, and there's just so much more money in doing more tenure or you know my career path will take me to seminary, and the thing is that there's so much more money to fund you getting your MDiv to become a pastor than there is to become an academic scholar, and you're really putting your own money out there, and that's it's a hard path to walk, and few choose it. But I'm gonna try my best, and I wouldn't mind going that route, to be honest. I feel more called to it, but each day.
Well, if that's what you really want to do, gotta at least
Yeah,
give it a shot.
yeah, yeah. It's got to be convincing the fiance, or working it out with her. I can no longer make decisions for myself.
Yeah, that's a consideration too. Life is all about trade-offs.
It is.
I wish I could think of some questions to ask Path. None are floating up into my consciousness yet, though. Oh, that'd be cool, Path, if you could do that, just for the education and knowledge. Is it expensive?
Oh, I'm sorry. Were you talking to me?
No, I was talking to Path.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if he's listening.
Okay.
Kind of expensive. Like where I live now, it'd be hard. I could go to the States, but if I was going to do it, I'd do it properly and move to Israel. And it'd be like being there for 2 years, learning full time, like 6 to 8 kind of idea. So
Yeah.
I'll have a lot of money, and then I'll just spend a lot of money, and I'll come out in debt. But
So basically, just save up and
yeah, you
then
can't
do
kind
it
of
all
get
in
that
one
kind of
shot.
education on the side. It's like that with anything. Like you have to be immersed to really get like where your whole life is like pertaining on like a certain kind of study is a lot different than like when you just study on the side, or like if you even if you study every day for a few hours, it's not the same as spending your whole day just learning and researching. So,
Yeah, makes sense.
but I mean at the same time, it's like the trade-offs are like I can't just like I'll get like a fancy title and papers, but I'm not planning to do anything like with that. I just want to go to learn. Like I'm not planning to like lead a congregation or like do counseling or something.
Yeah.
I don't know, if I write a book, it's good to have a title.
Well, well, well. Hello to my wonderful theist, atheist, and deist friends alike.
Hello. Sounds
I'm
like
sorry if I was interrupting. I'm a little bit lagged out here.
no problem.
Yeah, in terms of cost of education, it is steep. I mean, my strategy has just been to read as much as I can, and write as much as I can, because really you're paying to read books and have somebody read books with you, and
Hmm.
and I mean, it's one of the things that you learn in any liberal arts discipline, is that it's really all about the books that you read, and how intensely you engage the ideas in them. How can you do original research yourself, and it's it's really not. It's necessary to go, and it's not necessary to go. It's necessary to go to get the credentials. It isn't necessary to go to get the skills.
Yeah, right.
Well, what's nice is you have that structured system to learn within, and you have more access to,
The
you know,
resources.
right, and professional guidance,
Right, exactly.
and then at the end of it all, you have the fancy letters after your name.
And peer criticism is really important,
Yeah, definitely. Yep.
especially if you're learning like things like philosophy or theology.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's true in any field, but especially with those, you can like be so much in your own little world that like you can just completely go down some one path, come out and like look crazy. So it's good to like being able to bounce off ideas.
Yep.
Iron sharpens iron kind of idea.
Yeah, that is very valuable to have that.
Yep, absolutely. And I'm really happy that I've been able to meet and engage with the scholars that I really respect. It's I don't even know how sometimes it happens, but just there's a there's something there, just from being able to even email. I've had this really great idea. I want to talk to you about it. It's really, last book I read, Histories and Fallacies. I've been able to email this guy, talk to him, ask him for career advice. I think there's so much value in just going and meeting the people that you really respect. And like I said, no history is done in a vacuum. Everybody has not an ulterior motive, but at least a purpose for what they do.
Sure, yeah, that's definitely true. And they want to present a certain perspective on whatever they're writing about.
Hmm.
I mean, obviously, otherwise, what the heck are they writing a book for? And history is so bound up with, philosophical and ideological and political importance that I mean, it's just really hard to get like an unbiased, I guess, study of any particular thing in history. Obviously, some areas suffer from it a lot more than others, but you know.
Yeah. Yeah, libraries are. I, The biggest thing for me is databases. I love um, databases, and I really, it's the one thing that keeps me around a university is like I have to go to their library because I can't afford to spend, $80 a subscription to all these databases that may or may not help me in my research.
Hmm.
Even right now, I'm putting together a preliminary bibliography to this work I want to put together, and it's just so hard without those databases. I know I'm going to have to spend a solid day or two in the library just looking to see what they have.
That's using the database?
Yeah, using the database.
Oh, yeah.
Find your search terms and things like that.
Yeah, just imagine all these scholars back in the day, like 19th century historians,
In
all
a
the
way,
trouble they had to go through to write. Some of these guys had gigantic tomes that were so in
mhm.
depth, and 100-page bibliography at the back. Like,
Yeah, right. There's actually a famous commentator on the Torah. His name's the Balatorum, and his entire commentary. It's not like a regular commentary. He does very interesting stuff. He does a lot of works with like gematria, which is like I guess numerology, kind of like the idea, like the
hmm
equivalence. But what he does is he'll actually list the number of times a particular word is used throughout the entirety of the Hebrew Bible. I'm like, I think that'd be even hard with like a built-in search engine. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it's so tedious. But he sat down with the Bible and counted every single time the word was used, just for his commentary. And you read it for granted. You're like, oh, okay, this word's used this many times, so that's interesting. Oh, and this many variations. Okay, that's interesting. But when you put in perspective of like not even just pre digital age, but like pre any kind of sense of like putting all that down on paper, it's mind-boggling. But then you could even go back like centuries beyond that, even a few millennia, where you have people already creating libraries and categorizing them. It's the same kind of idea. It's just like we take it up a notch every few decades, I guess.
hmm
Well, I mean, in a way, I sort of envy those guys, though, because when they actually got their hands on a work, it was peer-reviewed, it was good for the most part. You don't have to sort through stacks and stacks of I don't know even how to describe them. They're not really stacks, but like just useless internet articles until you find something that's written by somebody of some merit. Like
Yeah.
it's just there's too much information available, and it just really clouds your ability to do anything right. And like a big problem is people who are doing scholarly research and they bring in some of this not as scholarly stuff, and they go in and do an article and they make these outrageous claims that don't really have any historic evidence to bear them out. I'll give you one example. I did a project on the Wyoming Valley Massacre in Pennsylvania during the Revolutionary War up in the Wilkes-Barre-Scranton area. British forces came down, Indian Alliance, killed they were Connecticut settlers in North Pennsylvania. And the there were two guys. One was John Butler, who was the British guy, and then the other one was Zebulon Butler, who was the Connecticut settler in Wilkes-Barre, and they were fighting against each other in this battle. And so one of the authors said, well, brother against brother, Wyoming Valley Massacre. And there's no evidence to say that they were brothers. There's no evidence to even say that they were related. They just happened to have the same last name.
Yeah.
And it's like, you got to be kidding me. Or there was another instance where there was a Reformation scholar who got their book pulled they were from I don't even know what university they were working at, but they thought that John Eck and John von Ecken were the same same person, and they were both contemporaries of Luther, and they were radically different people, and the publisher, said that this was so bad they actually pulled the book. So,
Wow.
I mean, you really got to be on your toes. The stuff that you read, you need to have the skills to decipher good stuff from rubbish. And so often, especially in Facebook conversations, I see people just using blatant rushes to defend their ideas and points. And they're not even able to see how politicized the source that they're reading is or something other. And I'm just like, come on, guys, do better than this.
Yeah, the internet's made it possible to basically publish a bunch of garbage.
Well,
Anyone can put something out there.
I think we're beyond that though. I think that was the case maybe like not too long ago, but now we're in the age where like anybody here could print their own book very easily.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's pretty recent. Like to print, there's definitely like obviously tons of rubbish books for a long time. Even like especially like in the past, like at least since like the '60s and stuff, you start to see that more. But they had to like get funding. Now you can like do it on your spare time, you know? You can just get a book printed up and that's it. Like we're in that new age where like it uses the internet kind of like pause that whole moment where people had to make blogs and their own websites. So like you'd have like this fancy kind of like it looks very professional, it's very laid out. They have like all these footnotes, so you see like, oh, this is a good website, I'm going to quote it, and it's just junk. But now you can actually print a book of junk for like nothing.
Yes,
And they're
you
just
can.
flooding the market. So like you're like, well, it's printed form. It must be good, you know.
Yeah, this is what I said. I mean, it's like the Holocaust in ours. They've got that Journal of History Review. This must be history, you know?
That's the other thing I was going to mention is just going off what you were saying. We're beyond the stage I was talking about, but we're even beyond that stage. Now you've got the creation of all these like bullshit journals that are quote
Right.
unquote peer reviewed by other bullshit artists.
Yeah.
And it's like, I mean, when you get to the point where you have professional journals that are just dedicated to the propagation of total BS, you're at the pinnacle of like, you know,
The loss of culture.
Well,
something.
here's the thing. There's a silver lining. When all of the idiots get together, you know where to stay away.
Yeah, to some extent that's true, yeah. It does get difficult though for people who are just getting into a field or looking at a field, even if it's just an amateur enthusiast, to pick through all this material that's out there and identify, what's rigorous and, you know, proper methodology, all that sort of stuff, and not just, some wacko going off on his own crazy rabbit hole, and presenting it as if it's all just plain
Well,
fact.
the kinds of newbies that end up getting out of that are those that have proper critical thinking,
Yeah.
those who have self-examination, who have a little bit of humility. So even if they at some point operate off of the wrong sources and they are told that it's wrong, they can take that in stride and have also a fourth element, a natural element of curiosity. They're curious about why it's not the case. It seems like a lot of the sorts of people that fall into that are the kinds of people that want to believe that in the first place and don't want to be told that they're wrong. And you see that in all areas of pretty much everything you can think of, not even just academia, in music and culture and pretty much everything. So it just kind of comes down to the caliber of the individual at some point.
Yeah, I guess what bothers me more than anything are these scholars who start citing, joke websites sometimes because even they get fooled. Um, I read one guy post on his Facebook, something that was from this, joke one of the joke news sites. It's one of the top 5 joke news sites, but he didn't know it was a joke news site. Yeah, and I was just like, yeah, I hate the internet. I was talking to one of my former professors. I was like, I really hate the internet. It's like, now you know my pain. Trying to do history in this age. Yeah, there it is, ihr.org. That's the Holocaust denial site.
IHateReading.org.
Yeah, I hate reading. Yeah, Institute for Historical Review. There you go.
Institute for Hogwash and Rhetoric.
There you go. They even got a store. They got an archive. Events. Leaflets. Oh, wait. The archive has the journal.
I watched an extremely bad video of the defense of theism against atheism. I'm gonna post it in the Facebook group, but it was like horrendous. It made me cringe. It was basically stating the whole premise. I forget what the title was, but I'll have to find it. But the premise was essentially that since atheists don't have any objective morality, that they might as well be drinking their father's semen.
Well, I mean that's what the what are they called? The Papua New Guinea. They had the men inseminate the boys so that they could have babies. But that's a pretty outrageous claim to make against
He,
Western
and
people.
Yeah, and his argument was, well, it's full of nutrition, and like you have no reason not to do it, so you should do it because it's
Yeah.
nutritious for you.
Well,
He's
there you
just not
go.
factoring in like things like people don't just like consume things because it's nutritious. Like
Well,
as
yeah, and I mean it also it assumes that people just because they have a utilitarian or self-referential worldview doesn't mean that they're going to always act in that way all of the time, no matter what the circumstances.
well, I'm gonna find it now so you can watch it after. I was just like, uh, it's just frustrating.
Absolutely, because it's just blatantly wrong. I find, I confess, I mean, I consider myself a lay apologist, but I find that really the inconsistency is the spice of life, and I find that atheists are just as inconsistent in their worldview as are um, some Christians, and I think that it's I think that there is something that we brought out in consistency, and I really think that that's good. Consistency is a good thing, but the people when you don't have a specific ideology, which atheism is, you're inevitably going to have an eclectic idea of what constitutes morality. I mean, and you really have a hard time describing it. Like Richard Dawkins said something really strange. He said, "It's something in the air. Morality is something in the air." and um, I mean, but I mean, I think that he's speaking truthfully about how he views it. I mean, it's not something that's bred in any specific system. And it's different for everyone.
Like yeah, like I'm trying to think of a good example. I don't want to say like pedophilia because like you could argue that's hurting somebody, but like maybe something like incest or something. It's like nobody would argue for that because like like it's just kind of innate where somebody would be like, yeah, no. This besides like a minute aspect of the population, but you don't need a sense of higher morality or like, for lack of a better term, God-given instruction not to engage in such things.
Yeah,
Ask
Because you don't find it.
ask European royal families about that.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. I
but
was
they
just gonna say,
justified it. I'm saying from like just a base impulse.
well, yeah, I mean, and the problem is, I mean, I think, there is something there though. I mean, what you end up doing in those situations is being extremely relativistic to your own time, and then objectivizing your current moral feelings and placing it on the historic trajectory behind you. And so you say, no one would say chattel slavery is right. Um, but in reality, if you were living during that time and you were just, and you were living in your socioeconomic class and you were living there, I mean, you might have. It was very rare. You know, history is interesting because it's the outliers that what is not normal for a historic narrative. When these Quakers and these German Reform people were starting these anti-slavery societies in the 1600s, that wasn't normal. um, and that there's something there. Um, we shouldn't just say at any given time what's normal is what is right, because oftentimes the things that brought us to today was those people acting in that way that said no, this is acting in a non-normal way. You see that with slavery, you see that with civil rights, you see that with any big social movement.
Of course, the problem with that is we innately want to feel like we're at a
The epitome of history.
yeah, we're at the pinnacle of morality here. We're
Yeah.
speaking, we can look at the broad expanse of history and judge it all from our our high seat, but then again, we'll eventually be history, and who's to say how we'll be looked at. I'm sure if you go back to the ancient world and you know if you could resurrect one of those slave keepers and ask him about slavery, he would have a just completely different, what we would consider morally very objectionable outlook, probably.
Oh, absolutely.
But he wouldn't think it's that at all.
Well, and I mean, his view of slavery is going to be much different in the ancient world as it is to today, or even as it was to people in the 1200s and 1300s. I mean,
Oh, sure, yeah.
people always viewed it differently based on their time, as situation, and everything else. You didn't see many Greek people cutting out the still beating heart of their slaves and sacrificing it so the sun would continue to move.
Right, yeah, obviously.
I would much rather be a slave in Greek culture than a slave in Aztec culture.
I could go along with that. But still, I think it's tempting for us to take up that advantaged position and judge everything else. I mean, we kind of have to.
I was just about to say like there's no other way to do it.
Yeah, well,
Like not
I'm
saying
not
you should
saying
do it in the first place, but if you're going to do it, it's the only position you can take. Like I'd much rather be living now than in any other period of human history that I know of.
Yeah, I mean, for the healthcare advantages alone, I think that's enough for me.
yeah.
And
I think just for
I
me,
am,
xenophobia is a good thing for me. Like it doesn't. Not saying it doesn't exist. Obviously, it exists now, but like
yeah.
not like it used to be at
One
any
of
point
the,
in history.
yeah.
Superstition in general.
So one of the things that I'm faced with in the sort of historic narrative is the fact that if Hitler did not exist, I would not exist. And that scares the crap out of me because, like, if somebody were to like go into a time machine and try and stop Hitler, assuming a time machine could exist, I would have to stop him because I would cease to exist as a human being if Hitler does not come into Germany and destroy it and, you know, commit terrible atrocities that cause my grandparents to leave the country and come to the United States, and then my parents meet each other, and it's just like, oh my gosh. What?
Well, I mean, all history has all kinds of weird contingencies like
It
that.
does.
It
It
doesn't even
really
have to be
does.
big events. It can
And I
just
mean,
be
to
some little.
me, I mean, it's justified because I'm God's greatest gift to humanity ever, you know. So, no, it isn't justified, but it's so weird to think where historic progressionism meets morality meets determinism.
Yeah, it is.
And I think that plays a lot into, you know, our understanding. You know, how do you understand slavery? I'm starting a book right now by Murray Harris, I think. Part of a series is just called Slave of Christ, and it's talking all about, you know, the big debate over doulos in the New Testament, and understanding the connotations of servanthood versus slavery, and you know how that affects, you know, how you view and operate, and you know, really really neat stuff.
Yeah. Just I want to just pick up on the Dawkins thing just to kind of defend him a little bit, but I think his approach is, and it may have been a, I'm not familiar with the comment he made, but I'll just take it for what it is. I think that he would say that there are certain aspects of human morality that seem to be innate,
Oh, of
but
course
then
you
but
will.
then there's this other, like, there's, well, not just one but several extra layers on top of that, say, foundation, that do seem to be highly culturally um, relative.
Do you
You
think
know.
there's some things that are from learned experiences over past generations that are just kind of like encoded in DNA?
Well,
Kind of like
I think there are such things as
kind of like survival
instincts.
tactics, but for like on a for a more intelligent being.
That's pure conjecture.
No, for obviously, but I mean, I'm trying to think from like that from that perspective how you would define innate morality.
Well, I mean, like, since he's an evolutionary biologist, he would approach it from like population genetics. You know, there's mathematical models which will predict, and game theoretical models which will predict, like, there'll be, like, you take any given animal population, there'll be a certain number of, or social animal population, there'll be a certain number of suckers and cheaters and grudgers, etc. And that will just mathematically play out, you know. But he would say that those sorts of things, like whether you're say altruistic or whether you're a cheater, those sorts of things can be informed by what you're talking about. Say, they become instinctual or they're inherited. But then there are other things that seem to be obviously instinctual too, like you know, when baby geese are born, they like try and follow the first thing that looks like it's alive, and they bond to it immediately, whether or not it's actually their mother goose. You know, that's just something that seems to be programmed into them. They didn't learn it, obviously. They're day-old chicks that do this, you know. So there does seem to be certain behaviors that, as far as we're aware, aren't learned. It seems like almost impossible that they would have been learned. Now, to what extent it extends into like higher order human morality, that's anyone's guess. But I do think there are different levels of morality, as far as like to what extent they differ among cultures. You know, like theft seems to be pretty universal. Just wanton killing of your other people, outside of ritual or ceremonial circumstances, seems to be pretty universally shunned. But any one of us could name a dozen things that vary from culture to culture.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the things that our sociology professor taught us about was we have cultural relativism, but we also within the discipline have critical cultural relativism,
Mm-hmm.
which is a hairy place to be, but it's the most necessary place to be because it basically the big thing during like sort of 60s and 70s where sociology and psychology were really becoming into their own was that man is the measure. Um, we look into sociology and psychology. We look at man and how he acts, and how man is. He is. There's nothing wrong with him. There's nothing. There's no fallen man. It's just him, himself, and his surroundings, and you can't make any real moral statements about his behavior. And then they started discovering these tribes in New Guinea who inseminate young boys by having the men ejaculate into the 6-year-old mouths, and then they started discovering, these cultures where people start, sharing their wives to a point where it's almost blatant and degrading, and people really reacted against that whole idea of man as the measure, and so they tried to come up with, all right, so really what we currently have is sort of a mismatch, hodgepodge of objective values that are sort of placed upon the sort of global population. I'd say murder is always wrong, or not well, murder is wrong. Intentional murder, or something like that, and in my opinion, it's a castle in the sky. It is a structure that's put in place because of the realization of the necessity of a structure.
Well, I wasn't meaning to say that those things were. I was just meaning to say that they seem to be universal. I wasn't making any. I wasn't trying to make any judgment call on any of the things, even though I happen to hold to them, obviously. But I was just saying that there are certain things that seem to be very, very, very widely held.
Yeah.
And then other things that are more specific. Some things really specific, like you said, these New Guinea tribes or whatever they were, that men ejaculating into young boys' mouths or whatever.
Yeah.
Or a real world example I know is that my mom lived for a while in Finland. Community she lived in, it was like I don't want to use the term gypsy. I don't know what the proper term for Finnish gypsies are, but fuck with the term gypsies. It was like high praise the moment, like kind of like their bar mitzvah was when a boy stole his first wallet or watch or something like that, which from the outside world, and then we're in a Western Scandinavian country, it would be objectionable, but for them, no. It was like that's how you came into your own, by being a thief.
Yeah. And just look at the difference between like the Indian approach and their tradition, like when it comes to helping the poor, like missionaries would come to India, and a lot of Indians would say, "What are you helping the poor for? That's their karma. They have that lot in life because of their karma. They did something, obviously in their past life or lives to be where they're at now. So let them find their own path. What are you helping them for? So that's a completely foreign idea to us Westerners, but to the Indians, it's totally natural.
Yeah, what strikes me as really interesting was the during Pol Pot's reign of terror in Cambodia, how the monks just sort of hung out at Angkor Wat.
What do they care?
Yeah, well, I mean, it was just like, this is part of the world, and there's almost like, even like the Tibetan monks with the Dalai Lama. I mean, they have no religious basis for what they do when they protest Chinese authorities who have sort of
Oh yeah, that's
taken
political.
over. It is a political nationalistic
Def
fight,
Without a
and
doubt. Yeah.
yeah, I mean it's just it's that's an interesting one because I think at least in American culture there was a huge fascination with Buddhism that came as a result of watching these guys self-immolate themselves in fire. Um,
Yeah.
in protest to the Chinese authorities, and what's interesting about it is that it really wasn't a part of their practice up until that point.
Yeah, it was spurred by the political situation.
Yeah.
Uh,
But that's kind of like the story of modern Buddhism. It's been more so defined by politics than it has been by the actual faith. So, especially when it
well,
comes to the West.
I think you could say something similar about a lot of traditions. I mean,
That's,
maybe not necessarily at the same point in time as Buddhism
I mean,
had it influencing them, but I mean, it, religion is not hermetically sealed off from the other facets of social
no.
life.
Oh yeah, for sure. I was going to say like the emergence of the there's no like term for it, but I'll call it the return movement in Judaism, where you have people who
Yeah,
were raised secular or whose even grandparents were secular become religious, but that's pretty much based off of historical events, be it the Holocaust or the state of Israel or persecutions in North Africa and the Middle East. They're purely reactionary. It's not like necessarily plainly rooted in spirituality, but it's a historical political reality that shaped that turn to a faith system, which is very interesting.
well, aren't there certain denominations within Judaism? I think I think it's mainly in the U.S., but there may be some European things too, where they're actually quite zealously against the like repopulation of Israel by Jews, or even the creation of Israel as a state.
Well, those are two separate concepts. Um, there's the creation of Israel state is by like a hyper minority, like maybe a few thousand people within the state of Israel itself, and mainly in America. That's
Hmm.
like a very small minority. But that's a different question than saying the repopulating Israel. So so most religious Jews. Oh, that's not true. A large portion of the religious Jews in Israel oppose the state, but they don't oppose living in the state.
Yeah.
So there's like very two different concepts. Like just because like you think like the idea of like they oppose this because Israel is like okay as much as people think it's a Jewish state, it's a secular socialist state,
Yeah.
right? So it just happens that it has a majority Jewish population. So the religious Jews would say we want to live in the land, but we just want a different form of government. That's very different than the anti-Zionist Jews that you would see like very propagated, especially on the internet, or like Zionism against Judaism and stuff. There's plenty of religious Jews that may not be Zionists in the traditional sense, but they wouldn't burn the Israeli flag in the middle of Brooklyn kind of idea, even if they don't really support the government of Israel.
Hmm.
That's just more of a, but that's also like a political situation, less to do with religion. Um, they're basing off of a very. There's only like two sects that do that. That's the Neturei Karta and Satmars, and Neturei Karta is a subsect of Satmar. They're anti-Zionists, and like they try to claim it as religious reasons, but it's really political in its essence.
Yeah.
But that's
Well,
very
that,
different than the movement. There's like a movement of not living in Israel versus a movement of not supporting the government. Those are two different. The movement not living in Israel is a hyper minority. Not supporting the government, it's like it's not even uncommon among Zionist Jews because the government isn't a religious body. The majority of people in the government aren't religious.
Well, what you said was the main point. Like when you said about I don't know how to say their name, the people that were opposing the state of Israel for what they felt were religious reasons.
Right.
Yeah, that's the whole thing. I mean, there's the interplay between politics and religion right there.
Right. Exactly.
And obviously, it's fringe today, but I think that sort of thing is probably going on all the time to some extent.
I think it's always been, or the clash of civilization. If it's not religious or if it's not political, it's somewhere in between. You could
Yeah,
look
I
at it.
think
You could look at a dissension in Russia during the Soviet era. Like there's people who they weren't dissenting against the Soviet Union. They were just devout Christians. They're just Orthodox. You know what I mean? And
hmm
it just became a political situation for the atheist Soviets, and it became a religious struggle for the religious Orthodox. Like it becomes so intertwined in this mess that it's like even if it doesn't begin that way initially, it just has to be.
Yeah, it can get to the point where it's difficult to really cleanly separate everything out,
In our
into
modern age, you
into
see that.
nice neat categories.
Yeah, in our modern age, you see that with Islam,
Oh
particularly
yeah, yeah,
after
big
the Arab
time.
Spring. You see like things in like Libya, like Syria, Yemen, and throughout and everywhere else. Those are like purely political struggles. They want to like uproot dictators and they want to uproot civil injustices against minorities. But it now has this entire canvas, maybe like 3 years later, of purely almost overtaken by a religious struggle now. Whereas
hmm
before it was just like university kids protesting. Now you have jihadists fighting against. You see that evolution very clearly.
Yeah.
Politics and religion, it's a messy thing.
Yeah, but it's impossible to have it other ways.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. I mean, all facets of social life inevitably will interact with each other,
Right.
Yeah.
Oh,
you know.
good example is Christianity in England and Britain.
Yeah, England. I mean, you don't even have to look at England. I mean, just look at the continent too. Um, it
Oh, it's
was
true. Germany and yeah, you're right.
I mean, England was sort of a latecomer to the Reformation. But they what was
Well, I was
interesting about
thinking before the Reformation.
well, England, yeah, well, I mean, the reason England ended up as independent as it did was because it was geographically separated from the continent. You
You
know,
don't think that would have happened if they shared a land border with the mainland?
it would have not. It would have looked the England would have looked a lot more like your
Like
other Northern
Episcopalian or something?
European. Yeah,
Well,
I mean,
what about Ireland? Like they were Orthodox and then it became Catholic.
Yeah.
yeah, they did, and they remained Catholic as a reaction against
That's
the
true.
um,
That's
English.
interesting. Yeah, which comes back to politics, right?
Yeah, it does. And I mean, politics and religion were just so intertwined. And what's interesting about England, though, is England's Reformation starts as a political separation where the popes just, or the king is, there's a mutual agreement. The king isn't really interested in theology, he's interested in limiting papal power. And, what it did was is it created an atmosphere where religious dissent could flourish, and that caused a huge problem for England. Obvious. Well, we know the history.
How's it going, Green?
What about Mormonism? I wasn't pausing that as like a response to anything. I was just curious.
Hey, how you doing, Doug?
Good. Yeah, Mormonism has political parts too, definitely. Just look at the
Yeah,
whole conflict in its formative years over polygamy. Just look at Utah today. I mean, there's still widespread polygamy.
I
Now
know.
it's just not enforced. The laws against it just aren't. People don't enforce it because so many people are doing it.
Utah today is the only. Correct me if I'm wrong, because I was talking about this with somebody today about the death penalty. I got very frustrated because I heard a radio interview on CBC, which is like the BBC of Canada, about beheadings, and they compared the beheadings in the Islamic State in Syria and Iraq versus Saudi Arabia, and I got very frustrated with that because they're very different. But they were also just juxtaposing that to capital punishment in America, and that made me think: isn't it true that Utah is the only state that still has a firing squad? And it has something to do with Mormons, but I didn't know if that was true or not.
I don't know.
But I remember it's something to do with like Mormons' belief about like blood atonement. Because like
yeah, blood atonement's huge in Mormon ideas, and
right,
it's
that's what I was
yeah.
thinking. Yeah.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right for pointing that out. But the thing on polygamy, the modern Latter-day Saint Church will excommunicate anyone who practices polygamy. What the sects that practice polygamy have left the mainline church because they have become too liberal, and they have created their own church called the Fundamentalist Mormon Church. And that's really people getting back to the original teachings of Joseph Smith and the original teachings of Mormonism. But at the same time, they just reformed their theology around the current political, social situation. Because basically what they did is they, instead of saying, well, you need to have a ton of wives for your eternal marriage to create the souls that will populate the planet that you're governing, you can just have one wife and have endless celestial sex with her, and continue the spirit babies that populate your planet and what have you.
Hmm.
And I'm sure Mormon theology says that African Americans and anyone with dark skin was sort of a fallen angel, and their ideas about how the world formed and everything else. I don't know how
Up
they
until they had an updated revelation.
Yeah, they got an updated revelation
Well,
in
I
the
guess that maybe
80s.
was a good reasoning for the treatments of African Americans in
Yeah.
Joseph Smith's time as well.
Yeah, it was trying to explain why do they have such a rough lot in life, when it's because they're the fallen angels. They didn't choose to be with Jehovah, and they didn't ally themselves with him, and they didn't ally themselves with Satan. So they are cursed to be the servants of the spirit children.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's what the South Park um, show, the musical on Mormonism. The strange things you hear about Mormonism, and you ask, is this true about Mormonism? End up being true, and the things that they say that seem to be normal about Mormonism versus other religious groups turn out to be false. Even sort of like I wonder if they embedded that within the musical just for fun. But I've actually been to a Mormon church. I had a friend who really, really liked me, and she wanted me to become Mormon so that she can date me. And so, I went to her Mormon church and um, successfully derailed their entire service and debated with their Mormon missionaries. And they never asked me to come again because I essentially made them look. I didn't make them look the way that they wanted to look in front of their congregation. So
You troublemaker.
I was in high school. I didn't care. I thought I knew everything.
Mm.
So yeah, she relationship didn't work out, probably for the best. So, but I really hammered them too. I was like, so you guys claim the Bible as part of your scripture. What do you do with Galatians 1? And
What's Galatians 1 and compared to Mormonism?
uh, there is no other gospel. If anyone comes up with another gospel, let them be accursed.
Oh,
So, so what do you do with that? I didn't really have an answer for that. No, there's a lot of eccentric claims in Mormonism. One of them is that John the Apostle is still walking the earth. Um, you
like
know,
some Indian yogi or something somewhere like, or like literally like he could be in like New York or Tokyo.
yeah, he's hiding out. He's sort of like the hidden imam in
Oh,
in
like the 12ers, yeah, yeah.
yeah, the Twelvers. Yeah, he's chilling with the three. Yeah, I mean, there's a really funny video that the Lutheran satire came up with about the Mormon Donald and Connell and the Mormon missionaries.
So Frank, how have you been?
I've been good, then. A lot of work. I have to do a lot of training, but I'm doing all right.
Good.
How you been?
Quite well. It's got the first snowfall today of the year, so I'm
Oh,
in for a long haul now.
oh man, usually it kind of stays that way for a while.
Yeah, like it's been pretty consistent recently, like in the past few years. It wasn't until like maybe the second week of December we got snow, like a real snowfall. So we're going to be a good 5 months in, maybe.
I remember I went to visit South Carolina, and I was at Paris Island. It's like a military depot, and I was in a Dixie platoon, and snow was falling that day, and it was like a live event. You shouldn't see it. People from the South never, some of them never seen snow,
Right. Yeah.
and just to see their faces of snow, like they couldn't believe what they were seeing. It was actually pretty funny.
Last year, maybe it was the year before, but I think it was last year. It snowed heavily in Jerusalem, and it caused like chaos for days. And it was like like not even maybe like an inch and a half, but like it was like power was out, buses stopped, like businesses were closed. Like it's for me, it's like it's a very different world. The idea of like a grounding halt of like the entirety of like the largest city of like of a country just stopping because of like snow for like 2 days.
Yeah, that's something that's very odd.
I guess it'd be
And
like
this
like where
is,
I live, like having like a sandstorm or something. Like how do you deal with that? It never happened.
yeah, yeah, you should see. I can't imagine. I think I would love to go to a place like Jerusalem, and it'll start snowing. Just to look at their faces. I wouldn't be shot. Like for me, I'll be like, okay, whatever. But
Exactly. Like last time I was in that part of the world, like it was a rainy day, and I was just like walking out with like a t-shirt and I had an umbrella, and people were like decked out in like toques and like mittens and like gloves and like puffy like winter coats, like we would say in North America, like that have like the hoods and they're like puffy and stuff because it was like a rainy day, so it was cold. They're like, aren't you cold? I'm like, I'm wet, but cold? No, like kind of idea.
I think that's probably a good thing. To be just like all covered in, you know, in what do you call it, like a survival gear.
Yeah, exactly.
So how was the hangout? I know I came late, but how was it? Or any topics?
I was in and out because I was on a business call, so
Okay.
Doug or Kevin may know better.
I came a little bit late myself, but like Kevin and I were talking a little bit about use of hallucinogens and Hellenistic religion, and then we got onto historiography and morality, a bunch of stuff.
Okay. Yeah, that's cool. Like, there was one hangout. I actually was there today just for a brief period. They were talking about objective and subjective morality. And what I found out, and what the rest of the hangout found out, that a lot of arguments are between theists and atheists about this subject. But the problem is that no one knew even myself didn't know what objective and subjective morality was. I think the argument that people get confused is absolute morality and relative morality.
Right.
Because absolute morality is actually unchanging. And morality could be objective. Because the definition of objective is without personal feelings or opinions about something, but objective morality could change. So that was a really interesting topic, because I think when people start debating, which I don't debate, but they get confused with the definitions of something, and then they start arguing about a thing that's not even. It's a wrong argument, because they're they're mixing up the definitions of something, and I always see that, because I always check. I was like, what does this mean? What does that mean? Um, I think one of the things that people have to start doing is just finding out the definition of something. What do you mean by objective? What do you mean by subjective? Are you talking about absolute, or are you talking about relativism or universalism? So that was an interesting thing.
Yeah. There's a lot of subtlety in that debate that often gets overlooked.
Yeah, agreed. And the other things that I'm finding out is, like, there are too much emphasis on generalizations and labels. I don't really get into that type of discussion. I look at things very individualistic. However, I know that some groups have certain goals and objectives, some have certain beliefs, and even within that, people feel differently about it within that group. However, they keep certain ideas intact within that group. But when I speak, I speak, you know, on my own terms, regardless of what group believes what, because I do have opinions and I could be wrong, and that's the major thing. I think a lot of people come into these things that with some absolute, well, if you want to call it, like, absolute certainty of something, and I think that's actually very scary. To be so certain about something, it always bothered me.
So, if I could play a devil's advocate, 'cause I definitely agree with you, but like when it comes to Islam, like where would you make the cutoff point? Like somebody might call themselves Muslim, but like where would you say, like, no, like for instance, like maybe like I could speak from people I've known, maybe like somebody who's like a Druze or like a Baha'i, or the majority of the Muslim world would say like no, regardless of like their normative sect. Like Muslim and like the literal like the five pillars, kind of like like the root concept, not just like somebody who like believes in God and all that. Like I know maybe personally you're not comfortable making that deliberation, but at some point you gotta like logically say like you're a little bit too far out of bounds, or is that just me like putting stuff on it?
Well, I think the only thing that will go far out of bounds is that, even with the Druze, I don't know if the Quran is their main book. I know for certain, groups, let's say for the Ismailis,
Mm-hmm.
which is another sect,
They're
you
like a
know,
subsect of Shia, right?
there's subsets of Shiites, and
Or like a very subsect.
yeah, it's like a Narazi Ismailis, because there's another group of Ismailis that are different, and most of them are in India and Pakistan, around that area. But then there's also the Nazararis, which I don't know if you ever heard about the assassins, the story of the assassins.
Right. Yeah.
That's them,
Oh,
and
okay.
they're still around. Um, so if a Druze or a Ismaili wants to call himself Muslim, I'm fine with it. I think when it kind of determines if they become like, you know, almost like, worshiping like a person as a god, like the Nation of Islam, then I will question the
Oh,
whole
fair enough. I
Islam.
didn't think about the Nation of Islam. That's a good example. It's a better example than anything I could think of.
Yeah,
They definitely call themselves Muslims, or like maybe like even like the Moors or something like that. They all call themselves Muslim, but like are they practicing Islam is a different story.
yes.
That's interesting.
Yeah, because it kind of
There's like some contradictory elements in doctrine versus labels.
exactly. It's all about monotheism and the way, for me anyway. Some
Yeah.
people may differ, but if a person wants to call themselves Muslims, it's fine. But I would just say that, you
If
know,
they'll say like they're like 100% monotheists and they utilize the Quran as their main text, for you that's kind of like anything after that, it's kind of like it's up to God kind of idea.
yeah. Now, if the person wants to make a case for it, then I definitely will listen. Yeah. But for now, I couldn't. Yeah. The Jews are an interesting group.
Yeah, they're very unique. I've met a few.
You know the guy Casey Kasem?
The
He was like
radio
a
host?
that radio host.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's the Druze.
Really?
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah, he's a Druze. And I was like, wow. I was like, I didn't know that.
must not be his real name or something.
I doubt it. I don't know if he's from Lebanon or from Israel. I'm not sure, but I know he was a Druze.
They have wicked mustaches, but I don't know. It's like the main thing that pops in my head, like these awesome mustaches they have.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I've seen some of them. Like having a mustache is not actually big in that part of the area, especially in Turkey. Like it kind of shows
Oh
like
yes, yeah. Turkey, they're big on that too. Yeah.
yeah, they're big on the mustaches. That even so, like I was hearing that some of them will, if they don't, some of them can't grow it fully, so they'll have implants,
Wow.
which I thought it was insane. But that's how big it is. Like having the mustache is. Well, I can't stand them. Like you can see, like I'll cut it and just have this because I'd rather have this than this.
Yeah. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Trying to think like about Druze. The only thing I can think that's very like unique about them. They're very much like an ethno-religious group.
Well, I think there was a period when the religion, well, when the sect first started.
They're a branch of is it were they Shia or were they like Sufi, uh, Sunni Sufis? Like there's like a guy that came, or maybe I'm thinking of these Yazidis.
There was a Shiite during the Fatimid dynasty. Um, it's part of, it's very close to the Somalis. I think what happened was one of them was supposed to be the imam. Like I think with the Fatimid dynasty, there were rivals of who should rule, who should be, because the ruler was the imam, supposedly, and they split off to different sects. One of them was the Druze. I'm not sure the timeline. I know it was around 10 something. Um, and that particular person followed this person, and they kind of branched off. And there was a period where they were taking converts. I don't know if it was a 100-year period or 50-year period, but then they stopped taking converts. They had their numbers, I don't know, but you can't really convert to Druze.
No, not anymore. You can't even
No.
marry into them. Like I think actually if I could be wrong about this, maybe I was talking to a liberal Druze, I don't know. But like if a man marries a woman, she becomes Druze, and her children are Druze. But like a female Druze, if she marries out of the community, she's no longer part of the community, and her husband can't become part of the community. But this relates back to what Doug, me, and Jonathan were talking about the mix of politics and religion. Is you look at Zoroastrians, they state now that you cannot convert to Zoroastrianism, which wasn't historically the case, but it only came about when a lot of them fled Iran and went to India, and became what were they called, Peshmergas, and the Indian government or whatever it was at the time banned them from proselytizing and gaining converts. So that kind of like trickled down to like now Zoroastrians will be like, oh, you can't convert to Zoroastrianism. I thought this is like it's very interesting how much of politics influences religion.
Yeah, it's strange.
Parsis, sorry, not Peshmergas, Parsis. You're right.
Hey, Doug, welcome back. Yeah, I would think that they were, because their numbers are so small, I would think that they will encourage converts.
Well, I mean, in Israel, there's a group of called the Samaritans, and they're only like a few hundred, like under 1,000, maybe 1,000, but they don't take converts, and like they're not getting any bigger anytime soon. So there's some groups that are like so fervent in their uh-oh, why not true? No, they don't. Yeah, but that's different.
Who are the Samaritans? Who are they?
So without getting into a complex history about it, Samaritans are basically an ethno-religious group that live in Israel and the Palestinian territories that are very similar to Jews. They accept the Torah, but their Torah is slightly different. But the only difference is really in locations of places. It's not like they have like different stories or different like laws or anything really. It's just like locations are different, and they've been there since like the Babylonian period. So like they've been there for like well over 2,500 or like about 2,500 years. They've been in that area, and yeah, they're still there now, and they practice a very ancient form of what we would call Judaism, or they wouldn't like that term, but they perform a very ancient form of it. Monotheists, believe everything that Jews believe, except they only accept the Torah, and they believe that Moses was like the last. Sorry, 1 second. He was the last, like, very true prophet. They believe in like other people that came after him, but like not in the extent as Judaism does, let alone Christianity or Islam. They don't have like all these prophets that came afterwards. It was kind of like Moses, another guy, and there's like maybe another guy who they kind of view as a prophet, and they're really waiting for like the end times where like their last great prophet will come. And they view Ezra. I don't know who Ezra is, and I know Ezra's mentioned in Islam, but I don't know what his name is in Arabic. Ezra's like they're like Antichrist. He was like the worst guy to ever.
Really?
Yes. Yeah, they hate him with a passion.
Wow. Why?
Well, for one, he brought back Jews from Babylon while they were there.
Why don't they like that? Because they were corrupted by Babylonian culture or something?
That's one aspect. They thought they were corrupted, but they also took over. So they view us as like followers of Ezra, right? And we're like the majority. And we were the majority when we came back from Babylon till today. So like and before that they were like a very strong influence of their faith in the land, because so many of the Jews were exiled to Babylonia, even though there's still some in the land. But when we came back heavy with full force with Ezra, it kind of seemed like it was an invasion force of like corrupted ideas, as they would say.
Wow, I didn't know that.
I'm just going to read Reuben's commentary for everybody else. So he says, not true about Samaritans accepting converts. Samaritans do accept converts who are Jewish women. As long as she adopts the Samaritan customs and religion, she's welcome into the community, just like the Jews we just mentioned. But like that's only about Jews, because there's a weird relation between Jews and Samaritans. Like Jews don't view Samaritans as Gentiles completely. In some regards they are, in some regards they're not. I guess what Reuben's saying is the same thing with Samaritans, that Samaritans don't view Jews as non-Israelites.
Are these the same Samaritans like mentioned in the New Testament?
Yeah, same people.
Oh, wow. Yeah, because there it seems like they almost have the status of Gentiles.
It's a love-hate relationship.
Oh, interesting. Daniel, I heard of them. I didn't know they existed.
Yeah, they also have their own Hebrew script as well.
Really?
Yeah, and they all have their own pronunciation. I'll post a few videos about them on the Interfaith Facebook group, and people could check out. But yeah, they're super interesting. They what's interesting is when a Jewish tradition is like proper and ancient, when Jews like halachic or Talmudic Jews, Karaite Jews, and Samaritans all agree on something. Then it's like a proper practice, because like those three groups have been split for a very long time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really fascinated with the Karaite. How you say it? The
Karaite.
Right.
Karat. Yeah, because they don't follow the Talmud.
Yeah, they have no oral tradition. They're kind of like I don't know what the term is, like chronic.
Yeah, the Quranist.
Yeah, the chronist. Yeah, exactly. It's the exact same concept. No hadith, none of that.
Mm-hmm.
Just like you have like your text, and that's what you judge everything based off of. So I guess you could understand that. That's why it's significant when like not only does like someone like myself and a Karaite agree on something, but also if a Samaritan who's like super removed from either group agrees on something, like you can find some ancient validity in that, authenticity, because it's hard enough to agree on like a lot of things.
Yeah, and finding the justifications for it in the rationale.
Exactly. Like we might even say like we agree on the same text, but even using like the same methods of the same methodology or the same exegesis to come to the same conclusions can also be difficult.
Correct.
Recently, actually, this past week, there's a for a while now. I guess people who are listening in the future, it's like November 17th, 2014. There's been a large scale increase in violence in Israel and the Palestine and obviously the surrounding areas, Lebanon and Syria. But this past week there was a big, I guess you could say brawl, like almost like a little small battle against of Muslims against Druze in Israel. It was big. There was like I don't remember how many people died. A few people died. It was very sad. And it's because what happened was a Palestinian stabbed a Druze soldier to death. So it kind of like kicked off from that.
Yeah,
Very sad.
it is. There's definitely anybody that, especially when groups get involved, it's
Well,
unfortunate.
that's what I was saying. That's why I think is the sad part. Like, obviously the death is sad, but it's the idea of like it becomes like so sectarian at that point, like us against them. Even though it's like personally, I have nothing against you, but you're like it's kind of like the Romeo and Juliet kind of thing. It's like I have no logical reason to hate you or to fight with you or to kill you right now, but you're them, I'm me. So like, it's disgusting.
Yeah, that's one thing that I love about this country is that you have all different types of people living together, and it's a very ideal time, and I'm enjoying it because just listening to the news in other parts of the world, regardless, I don't take everything in face value, but at least I don't have to worry about a neighbor
Coming over and
either.
hacking you up.
Exactly. Yeah, I don't have to worry about things like that, and I'm very appreciative. I'm very grateful, actually.
Well, the fact that we can do this right now is thing.
Yeah, thank God. And I hope that people could see this and just have some type of encouragement. Our world is getting smaller because of technology, so you know, hopefully these type of situations, these type of events get smaller also, and it becomes, it would not become the norm.
Evolve faster.
What I love what you said. Like I love that in this hangout we can have a Christian, a Jew, a Hellenismos, a Muslim, and whoever else, and there's no argument ends up, no like vitriolic argument ends up happening. That's awesome.
It is, and I hope it doesn't become a rare thing.
I think it already is rare.
It's funny because I don't feel like it is. I feel like this is normal. Maybe I'm the crazy one. Who knows?
Yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe I'm overestimating the tension.
Yeah, I hope so. But where's Kevin stepped out, right?
I don't know. He turned his mic off. He may be busy doing something, or turned his camera off.
Yeah.
I'll be right back.
Yeah, I'll be back too. I'm back.
Welcome back.
Yeah. Let's look at when I came, everybody left. That's the problem is when you come too late.
Yeah, you can
Start
just
later.
come at the very end.
And then you think you're the cause of people leaving.
No, you're never the cause of people leaving.
Yeah, well, I guess it was a
You're not one of those people.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I really do like Styler, right?
Styler. I don't think I do.
Oh, okay. You gotta meet this kid. This guy is something else, but he gets really excited. He's a cool kid, but
He's passionate.
I don't even know if he's passionate. He's just one of those guys that you bring into like a bar and you end up having a fight, a brawl.
That's funny.
Uh,
Nephilim's like that too.
Nothing free?
Oh yeah. Well, maybe not a brawl, but like no matter what hangout I've been in, if he comes in within 5 minutes, the conversation's right where he wants it.
It's
You know?
too much of the Jesus. It's too much.
Yeah.
Well, you open the door to stuff like that, and it is what it is.
Yeah, I don't dislike him as a person at all. I mean, he's always friendly. He
No,
doesn't
he is
attack you
actually.
as a person, and he's obviously intelligent. I just get tired of the constant evangelizing.
Yeah, it becomes a little bit too much.
Yeah.
You gotta with him, you gotta somehow, redirect the conversation to something else, which I tend to do.
Yeah. I'm bad at getting sucked into the argument, though.
Wait,
I
hold
guess
on.
call it a character flaw.
Yeah, that's true, Robin. I haven't seen. I don't know why people do it. Yeah, I was never converted to a particular faith because of somebody preaching. That would be funny if I ever seen something like that, Sufi missionaries. They try to keep you away from that stuff.
I'd love to see door-to-door Orthodox Jewish missionaries.
Yeah. Yeah, like my orders and the orders that I've been involved in, they don't want people around.
Yeah.
They try to keep people out.
What I miss?
We're Ruben actually made up a good point. We were talking about you know, people preaching a particular faith, but I never seen somebody get converted because of it. It does quite the opposite. I think what it does, it just put people away. It turns people off. As far as what I've seen.
Yeah, I think you already have to have your radio tuned to that station in order for it to work on you.
I think oftentimes like the methodology that's used to do it, especially like when I think about Christians or like I should say like American Protestants and Sunnis that do it is like very like fire and brimstone. Like how could you not? It's so logical. If you don't, you're going to burn in hell kind of idea. Like no, but I mean like I can see how it could work if like your radio's dialed into that certain frequency to begin with. It makes sense, but not so much in the sense that people do it in the streets.
Mm-hmm.
Like repent or die. Who's going to be like, oh, I better repent or die because this guy with a sign saying it?
Well, I actually think that those concepts are there for the purpose of evangelizing. I mean, they exist in the religion to be tools for that purpose.
Oh, that's interesting.
But, I mean, I look at religion from like almost an anthropological, social science type of view. So I'm definitely an outsider.
No, I find that interesting because we don't really have that in my faith.
Yeah.
There's no like kind of like you better live a certain way because your afterlife will stink.
If you don't, yeah.
It's not really there. It's more so the idea of like building a good society in this life. But I guess that's why you don't really have people that are like door to door, even like or like on the street corners trying to change people. You do have actually. No, that's not true. You definitely do have that. There's some groups of Jews that do that for other Jews, where they try to bring like non-observant Jews towards an observant lifestyle.
I know there was a big movement, and probably still is that to counter the how you call it, the Messianic Jews.
Oh yeah, counter missionaries is probably like the big, like that's the probably closest thing you can think of as far as like size of money. Because
Say that again?
What do you call it, Messianic Jews? The Messianic Jews.
or like Jews
They're
or
the
Jews
biggest
probably.
proselytizers?
Yeah, they're big time. Big time.
Oh,
proselytizers.
yeah. Way more than just
But
your normal Jew.
But the thing is because a large portion of, maybe not, at least a large portion of the Jews in the Western world are secular, non-religious, and never been brought up in any kind of system. So Christian groups latch onto them by teaching them a system and saying like, oh, you can still be Jewish, da 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 da, and like you're still in line with your heritage by believing in these foreign belief systems.
Right.
So you have a but like you didn't have a large so like they came very early in the game, but we're talking about maybe like the 60s. This is when all this kicked off.
When Messianic Judaism became a thing?
Or like first Jews for Judaism. But
Yeah.
like the counter-missionary movement in Judaism was only is very recent, maybe like the 70s and 80s is when it started, and like the 90s and especially now is like it's really strong to kind of mainly bring non-observant Jews to Torah and bring those who are like taken away because they didn't know any better back to like their ancient faith.
Yeah.
But it was only reactionary. It was a reactionary kind of movement to like this whole concept.
So you're saying there it was a reaction to Messianic Jews preaching Jesus.
Right.
Okay, yeah.
The counter-missionary movement. But it's also difficult to talk about because like the divisions of like secularism, like Reform, Conservative, and Orthodox in Judaism is like purely a European and American reality. Like even today, it wasn't like back then. Even today, it's purely like sustained within European like white Judaism. So like even in like Sephardic or Mizrahi, like North African, Spanish, Portuguese, Oriental, Arabian, Middle Eastern, and African Judaism, you would in those communities you would only have one form of Judaism, and that would be like what we would call like traditional Orthodox. And you yourself might not be so observant, but you'd still go there. You'd get married in that system. Your rabbi would be that kind of rabbi idea. So like you don't
Yeah.
have
A lot of Catholics are like that.
right, exactly. Like
They
you
call
like
themselves Catholics, but they don't give a shit what the Pope says.
exactly like in the sense of, like when it comes to religion, I'm not going to compromise, but my personal life will be different.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas you in the Western systems and the European systems, you have like this strong compromise. It's kind of like I still want to be practice my Judaism, but in a way I see fit. Whereas you have like in the majority of not the majority, but like the majority in the sense of territory wise of Jews, it's kind of like, well, if you're going to do something religious, you do it right. You don't kind of like do it haphazardly. So in relation to counter missionaries, like that's why you don't really have it in you really have it mainly in America, Canada, Latin, like Mexico, and especially and also in England. Oh, mainly in the Anglophone world, actually. Now that I think about it, but that only exists because the majority of those people are from the European traditions that like kind of already had this history of kind of like you can be Jewish but not really
Yeah.
like you could be sorry not Jewish but like you could be religiously Jewish and still be outside the framework of maybe traditional Judaism. So that kind of like led to how what we would call like the missionary element, the Judeo missionary element to seep in where they can be like you're still Jewish, you're still doing Jewish things, but here's like an extra few books of your Bible.
So I remember I was speaking to this a person about Messianic Judaism, and I said that if if a person converts to that particular faith, are they Jewish? She's like, no, they're not Jewish. But how about if the person was born a Jew and then went into that framework? And she says, no, it's not a Jew at all. I never really delve into it, but let's say if a Jew, let's say, starts worshiping, Jesus or any other deity, do they consider to still be Jewish?
From a Jewish perspective,
Mm-hmm.
Or would they be idol worshippers?
yeah, see it gets really complicated. If we're talking about if we're talking about in the modern day and age, I would have to go on the safe side and say they're still Jews. But I mean, if we're talking about like classical Judaism, like old school, like proper Judaism, like I would say proper Judaism, when somebody rejects monotheism and rejects like the proper interpretation of God. They get karate. It means they're cut off. They're removed from the society. They're removed from their community. And in ancient times, like in biblical times, when you're removed from the Jewish community, that means you're living with idolaters. Like you're no longer part of the fold. You're
You're
outside.
excommunicated.
You're excommunicated. So you're not counted as being one of us until you return. But I mean, and nowadays we can't take that stand. We can't take that stance because it's dangerous. So that's why we have outreach organizations where we wouldn't have before.
Why is it dangerous? Because you don't want to. They don't want to be perceived as like insular or something.
No, it's dangerous in the sense because we'll lose people at a higher rate than we'll gain people.
Oh, you mean it's dangerous to the perpetuation of Judaism?
It's not so much the perpetuation of Judaism, but it's more so in the sense those would be rare cases back in the day. It'd be very rare for that to happen.
Mm-hmm.
But since we have not only the influence of other religions, but we have the influence of secular culture, it's a non-option. So like there are still some like technical aspects about a non-observant Jew with a observant Jew. There's still some technical differentiations when it comes to the law, but we maintain those relationships in order to bring them back.
Like in Islam, and maybe I'm saying it wrong, Avodah Zara is like shirk in Islam. It's not so... Okay.
But also we're a nation, we're not necessarily a religion, so it kind of gets messy that way. So like a Jew's still a Jew, even if they don't practice Judaism. Yeah, it's complicated. I don't know. Yeah, sorry.
You know, some hardliners will consider not practicing, the rituals. I don't go by that school. It's not so much the rituals, but it's more about the belief of, even if you have the lack of belief in the deity, that's not the issue. Is that when you start worshiping, anthropomorphic, that's the big thing. That's when you're just like, no, that's just like a big time problem.
So Avodah Zarah, which is generally translated as idol worship or idolatry, literally means foreign worship, foreign beliefs, foreign practices. So it kind of aligns with what you're saying, something that's like outside of like the normative scope of understanding. That's how we kind of define idolatry.
Yeah, I think that the way it's defined, with us, is more about making partners to the Creator. Something that's something compared to, and that's when things are in error.
So,
you're better off not believing in anything than doing that.
So we also have a category called an Am Haaretz. It's somebody who from birth, which it's become more pop. It's like it's always been a category for like at least since well, I guess even maybe before the Babylonian exile, but for like well over 2,000 years. But it's become more apparent in the past 300 to 400 years. And Am Haaretz is somebody who's born not knowing. So like their parents are atheists. Is not the same thing as the saying they rejected their faith because they never knew it. So that's why it's kind of hard to say like a Jew who's not observant nowadays, because how many of them, especially in the West, ever grew up knowing what their faith was? And then you get into schools of thoughts. Like my school of thought, we would say there's a lot of people who are born observant, and if they reject it, they're still fine because they were born in observance that we would say were foreign, and there's reasons why they objected to things. They objected because they weren't brought up in a proper system. So they could have been like completely Torah observant, but they rejected it based off of certain premises that we would say you should reject those premises. But they ended up rejecting the entirety of the religion. So they would still be considered Amharites, like for lack of a term, it's called like an ignorant person, because they grew up not knowing better. So they would be judged favorably. They wouldn't be judged as like a heretic or anything like that for throwing off their religion. They'd be judged favorably because all they knew was something that we would consider to be improper. Sorry.
Very interesting.
What is that?
It's I have my computer resting on a radio.
Oh, and it just goes into static sometimes.
Yeah, the feet of the computer when I move it, push buttons and stuff.
Gotcha.
But yeah, an Israelite's always an Israelite. Like for instance, if they become like a Hindu or something, like if they like literally start worshiping like proper idolatry full front, they don't have to convert into Judaism afterwards if they return. They have to repent, but they don't have to convert. But if they're practicing a foreign belief system, they're considered a non-Jew in all regards. Like they can't be counted in like a quorum for prayer. You can't trust their kosher kitchen. You can't, like, all those things that you wouldn't trust a non-Jew with. Or like you wouldn't include a non-Jew in. Like they can't write. I don't know. It's like technical things. Like they can't write a Torah scroll or something like that. But if they repent, they don't have to like convert. So they're still like their status is still that of an Israelite, but in many regards, in nearly all regards, they're considered to be non-Jews. But that only comes to legal matters.
What about just Jews that identify as Jews ethnically, but they're basically just totally secular?
So that's what
What are you talking about?
That's what I'm talking about, secular Jews. But there's also a differentiation between secular Jews and non-observant Jews. So secular Jews, for the most part, are Jews that were never brought up, especially like in our generation. They were never brought up with any faith. They were brought up with culture. That's been the case for maybe 2 generations now.
So they're secular those are secular non-observant Jews.
Yeah.
There can be secular observant.
Some people say yes. I wouldn't say so, but there's definitely the issue is Jews that were observant and became secular versus Jews who have always been secular.
Okay, that makes sense.
But what I was trying to clarify before is there's some Jews that used to be observant and became secular, but since they're the observant world they grew up in, the things that they rejected, I would say, are things you can reject and still be observant. It doesn't mean, but they just thought that because of the world they grew up in, they rejected some things. I mean, they had to reject the whole thing. Mm-hmm. It kind of gets complicated in that sense. But as far as non-observant secular Jews go, for the majority of that's why we have Jewish organizations that do outreach. Like the big names would be like Chabad or Aish Torah. Their entire organizations are pretty much based on bringing Jews back to Judaism.
Right.
As a large portion of Western Jews aren't religious. We're brought up religious.
Don't follow Torah.
Completely secular. Like your any like caricature of like a American Jew kind of idea. Completely secular. Culturally Jewish, but no understanding of the faith. And in that sense,
Larry David.
Right, or like Jerry Seinfeld, or you know what I mean, like those kind of ideas. They identify as Jews, but they have no concept of their religion in like a true sense of it. So
it's such an interesting thing with Judaism. It seems like more with Judaism than other religions / ethnicities. Like there's this really tight correspondence between like being Jewish ethnically and being Jewish religiously.
Well, that's how our faith started. So like,
Yeah.
so
That's
like
a big part of Jewish religion is maintaining that ethnic identity, right?
it's more nationalistic. It's not ethnic,
Nationalistic. Okay.
right? That's why it's different. So like, there were Israelites before Mount Sinai, but
But no Jews before Mount Sinai.
right. So when Mount Sinai hit, what happened was there was a covenant. This is when we became a nation. We weren't a nation beforehand. So at Mount Sinai, there is a covenant between God and the people. And the covenant is more like a constitution versus a religious obligation. It's like the American Constitution, if you will.
So Abraham couldn't be properly considered a Jew.
No, I wouldn't say Abraham was a
He
Jew.
was just an Israelite.
Jacob wasn't a Jew. Or Isaac wasn't a Jew, Jacob was a Jew. But Jacob's children were Israelites. But what happened this is why it's difficult, because what happened at Mount Sinai was because there was a constitution that was given between God and the people were both Israelites and non-Israelites.
Right.
Because a portion there's a mixed multitude that came with them from Egypt. So that's
but the
why
non-Israelites had to follow, if they were living in Israel, had to follow the covenant rules, right? Covenant commandments.
no. Well, no, that's different. So this is what happened at Mount Sinai. What happens is that when they reach Mount Sinai, you have a group of people who are majority of them are Israelites, and also a large portion of them were people that came out of Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
Just random groups of people that also came out with them saying like, we want to get out of here. Look at these miracles; they're awesome. We're coming with you guys. So they went to Mount Sinai, and then they have the Constitution, the Torah is given at Mount Sinai, and the first thing the people says is that we have heard and we will do. Like we heard the conditions and we will do them. So that was like the signing of the Constitution between the two parties, like any other nation in the world. So that's why it just so happens that the signing parties were God and the people. So that's like the story. But the people were ethnically native Israelites as well as non-native Israelites. But those non-native Israelites became Israelites, right? So this is what happens: is that a convert to Judaism isn't really called a convert; he's called an immigrant
because he's joined the nation.
He's immigrating to a nation, and it just so happens that the nations he's immigrating to has a constitution, has a set of laws that are what we would call a religion.
So after Sinai, the label of Jew and Israelite kind of become one and the same.
Yeah, like the label Jew comes way after.
Right, I understand, but
but you understand the context, like a Jew as being somebody who's adherent to that concept.
Right.
An Israelite being an ethnic identity, a Jew becoming kind of like maybe a political identity or religious identity. But those are like one and the same. And the national concept is the idea of like you can be a native born or you can be an immigrant, but your whole nation is dependent on a faith.
Gotcha. Okay,
that's why it's very unique in a lot of ways from other groups.
Yeah.
That's why it's kind of hard to like pinpoint it. Like it's like not like Catholics at all.
Yeah, where it's just you either accept the dogma or you don't, and that defines whether or not you're Catholic.
Right. So you can still be ethnically, or your nation can still be one group, but your beliefs be different. But in Judaism, it's not really like that. Like that's why it's like a non-Israelite. Oh, that's why I'm saying it's better to compare Jews to a nation than it is to a religion, because if Doug moves to, let's say, Venezuela and doesn't reject his U.S. citizenship, he can still move back to the U.S. He doesn't have to reclaim U.S. citizenship.
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing with Judaism. If a Jew goes to another faith, he doesn't have to, when he eventually comes back to Judaism, if he does come back or she comes back to Judaism, she doesn't have to reconvert. Because the conversion process is like the immigration process.
But someone who's an Israelite, an ethnic Israelite, but not a religious Jew, if they join the faith, they're not an immigrant. They're just like one of
Yeah.
the sheep coming back into the flock.
So like the word I said for an ignorant person, am haaretz, means like it means like they're
They would be one of them.
yeah, but like the literal term is like
People
like
of the land.
a child of the land, but it means like a child of the diaspora. So
Oh, okay.
that's somebody who's born outside of the nation
Gotcha.
because they didn't grow up with any sense of true identity being part of the nation. So
Now,
like,
does that term does it refer to diaspora Jews whether or not they're practicing?
oh no,
Or
it doesn't mean literal diaspora. They could be born anywhere, but it means if they didn't grow up in a religious household.
Oh, okay.
It's that they're considered to be born in diaspora in the national context.
Gotcha.
So like they're like a citizen, but they were as if they were born in a different country.
Yeah.
So that's why they don't have to immigrate.
Okay.
I.e. convert. It gets kind of complicated because it's hard to define these terms in like a religious context as we know religion because it's really not. Which is why a completely secular atheistic Jew is still considered a Jew.
Right. Well, that's why what I was saying when we first started off on this topic, like that's what's so fascinating about Judaism is that it has this like dual role for the nation and the religion. Kinda seems to me.
Yeah, for sure. I would say we're a nation with a constitution, and just so happens our constitution is the Torah.
Yeah.
It's really improper to say that Judaism is a religion because it kind of breaks down when you compare it to all other religions in that sense. It kind of seems illogical if you try to.
Hello? Uh-oh.
I'm not gonna hear you.
I think Path dropped.
Did I drop?
Yeah, for a second there. You said it seems kind of illogical, and then we lost you.
I don't remember. I think it's like
religion.
it's like antithetical to compare Judaism to other faith systems because in a lot of ways it doesn't work. It doesn't compare.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're a nation first with a belief system second. But someone like me who's observant, I would say we're a nation first, and our nationhood is dependent on our belief system.
Right.
But I would say, but even me who's observant, I'm sure anybody else would say we're more comparable to like being an American or Canadian than we are to like being a Christian. So because especially since our faith system is dependent on community, it's dependent on history, it's dependent on nationality.
Well, it seems like too, like with respect to the law, just continuing with this nation metaphor, but like you're living in a nation, say the nation of Judaism, and if you don't follow the laws, in this case the Torah of that nation, you're like basically persona non grata. You're out, basically. Not in a bad way, like but you are kind of deported in a sense.
Yeah, historically that's what it'd have been like.
Yeah. But it seems like doesn't it seem like, say, after rabbinic Judaism started up, didn't it maybe not that early, but at some point since then, it seemed to kind of take on maybe a more religious aspect than just simply like a law, national identity aspect? Or was there ever, in other words, was there ever a major difference between like Second Temple Judaism and rabbinic Judaism in that particular respect? Like, To what
So
extent it's a religion versus just a national identity and following the law?
I reject that because I would say the concept of the rabbinic concept of Judaism is it's really kind of you're debating schools of thoughts. So I would say rabbinic concept of Judaism is maintaining the law in the not in the diaspora. It's hard. Rabbinic Judaism pretty much is stating people that call rabbinic Judaism what it is we're all it means is we're codifying the system of the national courts that weren't codified before, i.e., making the Mishnah, the Talmud, the Tosefta, all those works of law, so that our national identity remains in a place where we don't have autonomy.
Gotcha. So you can
But it has nothing
keep
to
it
do
up,
with
say, no matter where you're living.
exactly. But the concept of saying like rabbinic Judaism is a shifting from a legal political aspect to a religious aspect, like I find that so ridiculous because I would say we never shifted to a religious aspect because I don't view our faith as a religion.
Okay.
Like I don't think you can be fully observant Jew and live on a mountaintop.
Yeah.
You have to be in a community.
So do you see, I mean, I'm just going to use the terms because it's something that is commonly used, even if you're saying you don't accept the distinction, though. I don't know, like, do you see any distinction between, like, Second Temple Judaism and Rabbinic Judaism, or is it just kind of a continuation of what was, just now we just don't have the temple?
It's a continuation, but it never paused because the court system kept on going. So there's new amendments and new legislations that came after the Second Temple period. So that's why I could say like my faith now is different than the Second Temple Jewish faith, but it's not different because of my diaspora.
Mm-hmm.
It's different mainly because of the court's rulings about certain aspects of our faith.
Because
But
of the addition of the oral Torah stuff.
Right. So, but a lot of those differentiations are in direct response to the idea of the destruction of the temple and the exile. So, like, it's kind of both. So, like, at first, it's the idea of like it's not because the faith is different because there's no more temple. It's because there's different rulings, there's different court cases, there's different legislations that were made by our court systems, but a lot of those were also influenced because there's no temple. But the ritualism versus the faith aspect didn't change, just like it didn't change in Babylon, in my opinion, at least.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. That clears up.
At least it's the idea of like not saying we went from like a ritual-based aspect to like a spiritual-based aspect. That's like completely antithetical to my system.
Gotcha. Okay.
The only thing is kind of like it's not like this in Canada, but at least like it's like this for you in America. It's as if like let's say America was taken over by I don't know, let's say the commies. But you still had your Supreme Court ruling for like a good period of time. So you were like, you weren't communists. You're still following the Supreme Court's rulings on your Constitution. But at some point it just stopped. And since it stopped, you can't make amendments to those rulings. Because you need another Supreme Court to do that. So it's like that with Judaism. It's even though so we were autonomous and our faith was going, we were under occupation, but we still had a court system going, but then the court system ceased to exist. So our laws were paused.
Wait, what do you mean it ceased to exist?
Because the Sanhedrin, the High Court, the Supreme Court was disbanded, and the Sanhedrin.
I thought you were saying that that those things continued on, or.
I think if I interject, what I think is the Supreme Court was gone, but you still had your lawyers, and you had your circuit court judges, but there's no really supreme
Oh,
court.
yeah. This is where it gets confusing.
Yeah, I'm confused. So, I'm sorry.
Right. Yeah. Um, uh, so basically, what happened was when the last Sanhedrin was disposed of, there is no universal, legally binding interpretations or injunctions on Jewish law that have been made, and that's been for 2,000 years now.
Is it? I'm sorry to interject, but is it because there's a supreme guide or a supreme person that actually was
No,
in
no,
charge of
it's
that?
a court. It's a court of 71 judges,
Okay.
and the Torah mandates that we have this legal system if there's any ambiguities within the Torah, especially if it's like within our day and age, we have to interpret it, and we don't know how to interpret it. Not that the Torah in itself is uninterpretable, but you have to have these court systems to interpret it for your day and age. So that's the Sanhedrin, that's the Supreme Court. And then what happened is that the Roman occupation, we still had a Sanhedrin, we still had a Supreme Court ruling and stuff, but then roughly around the year 68, things got really bad. Like, they were bad to begin with, obviously.
Yeah, they got really bad. 68.
But they started to get really bad around the year 68, and then the temple was destroyed in 70, and the High Court was already moved around 69 out of Jerusalem to Tiberias.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, off the coast of the Galilee.
Because they knew what was coming.
They got out of there as soon as they could. But basically, what you have, I'll just break it down for text. So basically, what you have is Judah Hanasi, Judah the Prince, or sometimes called Judah the President, and that because he was the 71st person of the Sanhedrin. He colloquially it's called Moses' seat. It means he was like the president of the High Court. So there's 71 people, so like whenever you make adjudication, you never go 50-50. You always go to majority. And the 71st person is a leader. It's the Sanhedrin. It's the Nasi, which means president or prince. And
the tiebreaker.
Exactly. And he sits in it says that he sits in Moses' seat because Moses was considered to be the 71st person on the Sanhedrin.
Oh, wow.
Or of the first court, the one that he was alive when it was instituted. And so Yehuda Nasi, what he did is he composed the Mishnah, because what the Mishnah is it's the recordings of all of the legal rulings of all the courts from Moses till his period of time, which aren't that many. And what he wrote the Mishnah. So when he wrote that, he just gathered all of the rulings of the courts from Moses to his period of time that were distinct from things you can't derive from the Torah itself. That were like, doesn't matter. So he gathered those things together and he made the Mishnah. And the Mishnah, before that, was all oral, or it was just written in documents that you'd only refer to, but people just knew the law. So he actually put it in one book because we were so far in the diaspora. We were getting so far in the diaspora at that point that communities were getting too split and it would just get lost. So he just decided to codify it what was never codified before in one document called the Mishnah. And the Mishnah
what was
isn't.
the date of this you're saying?
Pardon?
This was how long after the fall of the temple was this codification?
Like 150 years.
Oh, okay, so a while. Okay.
Yeah. We were still in groups, very close-knit communities. This wasn't a reaction to the destruction of the temple. It was more so a reaction to the exile. Because the period between
exile from
the temple and the
Jerusalem.
exile, there's difference. So that was the Mishnah. But the Mishnah was written in a way that could be memorized.
Okay.
So it's written, it's kind of like, if you read the Mishnah, it makes no, it's in extremely short form. it makes no definition of what the ruling was. It also codifies debates, but it doesn't tell you who won the debate between the two parties that was presenting the case in the court. So it's kind of like it was written in acronyms. So like it would be like ASAP, but if you weren't taught what ASAP means, you just read ASAP, and you'd be like,
Oh, so it's written in like a mnemonic form, kind of.
somewhat, yeah. So then what you have is when that period, when it grew more and more, you had things like the Tosefta and the Braitoth, which were documents that weren't included in the Mishnah. So the Mishnah is an early document, but it's based off of documents like the Tosefta, the Sifra, and the Braitoth that came before the Mishnah. But people don't really, it doesn't matter. So you have the Mishnah, and then you have all those other documents, and you have people who are students of the scholars who are mentioned in the Mishnah, and they're part of those schools of thoughts. They came, a lot of their groupings and understandings came together to explain what the Mishnah meant, to explain, like, it explained what the ruling of the Mishnah was, it explained the history of what happened, it explained who the people who were talking were, and that all those came together and became the Jerusalem Talmud. And then the tradition kept on going on, and then it finally got codified in the Babylonian Talmud. So the central document of all the both Talmuds is the Mishnah, and what the Talmud actually is the Mishnah in the center and the explanation of what the Mishnah is talking about around it. And you have the Jerusalem, or the sometimes called the Israel or the Palestinian Talmud, and you also have the Babylonian Talmud, and that's explaining what the rulings of the Mosaic courts were.
And the Mishnah again is
the entire compilation of the rulings of the courts from Moses up until the time of Judah Hanasi.
So it's including the Babylonian and the Jerusalem Talmud?
No,
it's not totally separate.
Separate. So like the Talmud, like if you say Talmud, it includes the Mishnah and the Gemara. The Mishnah is the rulings of the courts, and the Gemara is the explanation of those rulings.
And that's the oral Torah. Basically.
And that makes the Talmud.
Okay. So then what's the difference then between the Jerusalem and Babylonian Talmud if they both have the Gemara and the Mishnah?
Right. So the Jerusalem Talmud came earlier, and the Babylonian Talmud came later. I think the difference is 100 and some odd years.
So the Babylonian isn't a separate tradition; it's just a later codification or later stage of development.
That's a better thing. It's a later clarification. It's not codification, but it's a later clarification.
Okay.
And it's larger in its contents.
Okay, so it's not like a totally divergent.
Not completely, but there are some differences because some sages are different. So you do get different methodologies later on.
Okay,
but there
basically
are different books. It's not like if you pick up a Babylonian Talmud, you'll know it's in the Jerusalem Talmud. You need both, but the Babylonian Talmud was later, and it was like the final kind of. It clarified everything.
Okay.
That's why it's utilized as like the main text.
So if you were to read both really in depth, you may come across stuff that isn't quite totally harmonious because you have different rabbis.
100%. Yeah, no doubt, for sure.
Yeah, you have different rabbis using different.
And they're coming from different schools of thought. They're coming from different academies, universities.
Yeah. Okay.
And there's for a while, like after the codification of the Babylonian Talmud, there's been a long time struggle between the academies, the universities of Babylonia, like in Sura and Baghdad, versus those in the land of Israel and Syria. There's like almost like a rivalry in a way. But all the Talmud is an explanation of the Mishnah. It clarifies stuff.
And the Mishnah is the collection of rulings since Moses.
Of the courts, yeah. Of the official courts,
yeah. Because that stuff is not laid out in the Tanakh, right?
You see it mentioned in the Tanakh.
But it's not really gone into in depth.
It doesn't tell you why they do it, but you see like people doing stuff in the Tanakh that's not mentioned in the Torah, but that's because a court made a ruling on it. So you see the rulings of the court enacted in the Tanakh. For instance, like in the book of Esther, where they start to observe Purim, or Daniel risks his life to pray 3 times a day, or he won't eat some food because he says it's not kosher. So you see all these aspects, or like in the book of Zechariah, in the book of Nehemiah, they talk about laws about Shabbat that's not mentioned in the Torah. So you see all these aspects where the court's rulings were enacted in the Bible, but they're not said like, oh, the court did this, so therefore he does it. You just see them doing it. So what the Mishnah is just saying is like, this is what the rulings of the courts were, and
the Talmud just explains why these things were like.
Yeah, and it also explains a lot of things. It also explains who the people the Mishnah is talking about is. Like it'll say like Rav Yossi said this and Rav Ishmael said this, and it'll say like, well, this is the biography of Rav Ishmael. This is a biography of Rav Yossi, and it'll also describe things about their wives and things about their family, and it'll also describe if two members of the court brought about 2 different aspects of the law, who actually won the case. Because the Mishnah wasn't the Mishnah was meant to be. So we have all the court cases were meant to be like remembered orally or mentally, and the Mishnah was written in a way so that a teacher could teach you it and explain it to you. But when that started to like degrade, you had the Talmud that would teach the Mishnah to you. Because when you're reading the Mishnah, you're not supposed to read it by yourself and understand. It's supposed to be taught to you, but you just have the text in front of you.
So, is there anything that any type of literature that would actually explain the Tanakh? But does the Mishnah does that?
The Mishnah only explains law. It doesn't explain things like
interpretations of the Tanakh.
No, you have commentators for that.
Yeah,
and you have a wide variety of them. But a lot of those things are also found in the Mishnah and in the Talmud, because that's how you derive law. You derive it from what the prophets say and what the sages of old would say, or especially what Moses would say or what he would act. You would also derive explanation of law from that. So you could utilize those things as commentary on the Bible, on the Tanakh, but it's mainly just to derive law from, not to like actually explain a scene. You'd use commentators for that. In which case, there's no official version. So like the law, there's like one law, has to be one law for everybody. But when it comes to explaining the Tanakh, it's like it's not an official narrative. You have a multitude of commentators saying multiple different things. Sometimes they agree, sometimes they don't.
Wow, what the Mishnah actually kind of reminds me of it's a very, very complex form of Hadith's literature. Yeah. Because it says such and such said this, got this from this person, such and such at this date.
Yes.
Yeah, it's similar, but it looks like the way it's done here is a very more complex form.
More in a legal framework.
Yeah, more in the legal complex. Yeah, it's to wrap your head around this stuff is intense, but very interesting.
Yeah, I love hearing about it because I
learned a lot.
Caught up.
Well, what happened is, because it's so complex, because you have the Mishnah, you have the Talmud, and you have the Jerusalem Talmud. Like the Jerusalem Talmud, if you there's a reading cycle. I think it's I don't do it anymore, but I think it's 3 years. The 3-year reading cycle where you read a page a day and you finish it, or maybe it's more than that. Oh no, maybe it's a 7-year reading cycle. No, it's 3 years, right? Right. It's a 3-year reading cycle, the Babylonian Talmud alone, where you read a page a day and you finish it in 3 years. And then you also have the Jerusalem Talmud to go through, and then you also have to study the Mishnah in its own Then you also have the Tosefta and Tosefte. So what you have is later on that comes about, you have codifications of the law, where you can just pick up a book and just know what the law is. You know what the biblical law is, and then you know what the ruling of the court is. So you don't have to like pan through the entirety scope of all this literature just to understand the ruling of a certain case.
So if I want to get the Mishnah, the Gemara, and both Talmuds, what do I get?
Both Talmuds contain the Mishnah and the Gemara. That's what a Talmud is.
So are there? Okay, so the Mishnah and the Gemara were around before the Talmud, and the Talmud.
No. The Talmud is just when the Mishnah and the Gemara is combined. So the Mishnah is a
So the Talmud's not adding anything to the Mishnah and Gemara. It's just a combination of two already existing documents.
Right. That's what makes the Talmud the Talmud. The Talmud is you have the Mishnah, and then you have the Gemara explained. Sorry. You have the Mishnah, and then you have the Gemara explaining the Mishnah, and that's what makes a Talmud.
Okay.
So that's why sometimes the Talmud is just called the Gemara.
Okay. Because it's the commentary on the Mishnah.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, like in the Noahide Nexus, Noah's Nest stuff, like when they're reading from commentary, quote unquote, like it seems to be commentary on the stuff in the Torah. So, like, what are they reading from there? Is that
it depends on the commentators. Like it could be commentators as early as before the Mishnah, as late as like people living today. Depends on the commentator.
Okay, so those things like the stone, like they're not.
Oh, the stone Torah is like their commentary is like a compilation of a bunch of different people.
Okay.
And, like, so it'll name the person who they're quoting at the end of like the commentator. It'll be like in brackets.
So the Torah commentaries aren't standardized like to the extent that the Talmud is.
No.
Okay.
So like for Judaism, it's law is binding, theology is not. There's no dogma, there's no but the law is a law.
Okay.
That's why I'm saying it's also like a nation today. Obviously there's some states that are different, but like the state can control what you believe or think, but it can control what you do.
Okay. And that's what's really key in Judaism, right? Not the belief so much as following the law, the Torah. Or is that incorrect?
Sorry, say again?
What, if anything, takes precedence or the role of primary importance in Judaism? It's not the beliefs, it's not the theology, it's to make sure that you follow the commandments, follow the law. Is that right?
Yeah.
That's more important than your theology.
Yes.
Okay.
As far as if it's your personal theology, not your public theology.
There can be a difference?
Yeah, because the whole goal is to build a functioning Jewish society, because the goal of the functioning Jewish society is to be a light to nations, so that we can build a functioning global society. So society reigns supreme. And that's why we have concepts of dissension against the faith publicly are sometimes capital offenses, because like you're committing mutiny.
Yeah.
State.
So you can have a personal theology, but if you feel like it could endanger that national goal, like what you're talking about, you would keep it personal. You wouldn't make it public.
Yeah, and as far as not punishment, but like your judgment would be seen very differently.
Huh. That's interesting.
That's why I keep on saying it's more like running a state than it is a religion. So, like, if a court rules something, you can disagree with them, and you'd be completely considered sinless. Like if a court says that the interpretation about carrying on Shabbat means you can only carry a certain weight um, and not a certain measure, I could personally disagree with that, but that's completely fine. But I would still have to actually do it.
Right.
I can say they're wrong, or I could say a certain kind of concept of theology that I find in the Bible is wrong, but that's different than me disseminating it, and I wouldn't be punished thereof. Because God cares about that you're. I'm not trying to be like preachy, but like it'd be like God cares about that you're critically thinking before anything, and even if you're critically thinking something that might seem against orthodoxy, He also cares that you're not trying to destroy the system.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, it depends if you have like righteous motives to do so. Like, there's some points where you have to like reform the system. And you'll be
Seems like such an enlightened and balanced approach, honestly.
But that's like the prophets had it, where the prophets would be like, okay, well the majority are. Well, you also have like the court system, where like the court could rule something, and if the populace does not agree to it, then the court has to annul it.
Ah, so the population can kind of override the courts. Just
As long as the as long as the populace isn't like following like.
They're not worshiping golden calves.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, like if the court rules on something and they see and the people aren't doing it, then the court has to annul it, because then it'd be like if they keep it on the books, then you just have the people sinning.
Sinning. Yeah, exactly.
So.
Huh. Interesting.
That's why I know it sounded long-winded, but like.
No, I love hearing about all this.
No,
yeah,
I'm sure
it takes me a while to describe how it's different than a lot of religious systems, in the sense that it's a lot more legalistic. You could have your personal beliefs, and that's different than your faith.
Well, yeah, I mean, you just made it all the more apparent, just to the extent to which like Judaism is more, or is better described as like a national identity more than a religious identity. Seems like. Is that right?
Yeah. The individual has a religion, but the nation has its identity. Like they have their constitution.
Right. And the laws of the land of the nation of Judaism is the Torah.
Yeah. It just so happens that it's very different than any other constitution.
Right. Yeah, that's really interesting. I feel like I have a much better grasp on
So
that.
but also kind of, I guess, I hope it explains why you could have atheist Jews.
Oh, yeah, definitely. As long as they're, well, Jews or Israelites? See, now I'm getting confused.
Oh, that's a whole different story. It
Okay.
kind of becomes redundant at some point. But
Yeah, they start to become fuzzy borders.
I would have to like write you. I'll write you out something on Facebook to
I
understand.
guess it could be time for another discussion.
Yeah.
At one
Yeah,
point.
it would take too long to. But it just becomes it's semantics. It's colloquial nowadays. But there are legal definitions. But it's just semantics now.
Yeah.
Someone born Jewish.
Right. Yeah. Whether or not they're believing, whether or not they believe in God.
Right. It's just like somebody. Okay, for instance, it's like I could be born in Canada, but I could hate the Canadian system. I could hate the constitutional monarchy, and I want to be a republic.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't make me not a Canadian anymore.
Right. Gotcha.
Even though I want to usurp the system. Or I guess, and like if you could be born American and you want to replace the republic with a constitutional monarchy, it doesn't make you not an American.
Or make America into a communist nation.
Right. Exactly. Same thing.
You're still an American citizen.
Yeah.
So I guess in Judaism there's also schools of thought, like different type of schools.
Yeah.
And things like that. Yeah.
And that would be in the realm of theology and um, methodology. It's very rarely where there's probably like maybe 3 schools of thoughts of how we interpret the law, but when it comes to interpreting like theology or like how you view the Torah or like concept of like different kind of theological matters or dogma, there's like, I don't know, who knows how many different schools of thoughts and sects there are. That's where the real division is.
Yeah, we have 6 major ones, and then from then on, it's just there's subsets of it, but they go by teachers, schools of thought, but they usually come by their geographical areas.
Oh, it's very similar to Judaism as well.
Yeah,
Also the same thing. You'll have like a higher concentration of one group in one area just because that's where it started.
exactly. But there's also schools of thought as far as the view of the theology. Like there is a Illuminist school, like Illumination school, which I think is called the Shrakia, and then you have the Rationalists. It's
We have that too. We have rationalists and we have like Kabbalists who would be like super mystics.
mhm.
Like Kabbalah people.
Yeah, and they'd be on like the exact opposite spectrum as rationalists,
Mm-hmm.
and they would disagree on a lot of stuff, And then you have everything in between. Then you also have groups that are beyond those 2 groups as well. But those are like the 2 kind of like spectrums that you would have is like mystics and rationalists.
Yeah.
And then within those you have like a little blending of the 2, and you also have like groups that come off those that are even more diametrically opposed.
That with the schools of thoughts, with the Illuminist school and the Rationalist school, I'm very familiar with, because they're basically subsets of that type of. I take kind of both of the views. Like I like both of them, but it's the same thing as calling things that are, let's say, not so much divine but perfect. Anything in creation is, there's a certain thing that is perfect in creation, which I tend to disagree with. But we have that type of argument back and forth on what is what. But it's very rare because not a lot of people know about it. But it's a time for another discussion. Because there's not a lot of people that actually know about this stuff.
There's so much to know.
Oh yeah.
A little time.
Yep.
No, but I learned a lot about this because I wasn't, that was a very important piece of information that now finally I kind of realize, okay, that makes a lot more sense than before, because it used to be like a vague thing, but it's good to shine some light upon it. Thanks.
Yeah, if anybody wants to know anything that I might know, probably I don't know enough, but I'm always here. I can always explain something with my own bias, of course, because my bias is the best bias.
Isn't everybody's?
Right?
Alright, cool. Well, guys, I gotta get to sleep. I gotta wake up early, but it's good talking.
I think that's it for me as well.
Yeah.
Okay, sweet dreams. Hope to see everybody next week.
All right.
Yeah.
All right,
Guys.
peace out, guys.
Peace.